All right. Dan? Ready? Okay. All right. Seeing it's 5 p.m., I will call the Village Board of Oregon for Monday, June 6th, 2022 to order. Candy, if we could have roll call, please.
Feshin,
Here.
Belo,
Here.
Glish,
Here.
Jacobson,
Here.
Peterson,
Here.
Van Campen,
Here.
and Wunsch.
Here.
All right, thank you. We're on to 3, which is approval of the May 16th, 2022 Village Board meeting minutes. I'll take a motion in a second. All right, I see Derek and I saw Carlene's hand. Any discussion in the minutes? All right, hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. 4 is public appearances. 4A is oath of office ceremony for Cassidy Ruckty, police officer for the Oregon Police Department, including police chiefs. Chief's going to start.
Yes, thank you. Before I go ahead and swear in Cassidy, I want to share a little bit of information about her with all of you. Just a few details about Cassidy. She grew up in Milton, Wisconsin. She was an active member of the local Future Farmers of America chapter and volunteered at her local church. She attended UW Green Bay with a Bachelor's of Arts and a double major in Democracy and Justice Studies and Political Science. One of her college professors described her as very supportive of diversity, self-disciplined, and very determined. On May 13th of this year, the lieutenant and I had the privilege of attending a graduation ceremony for Officer Colson. If you want to raise your hand. If you remember him, he's one of the last officers we swore in. And also Cassidy Ruckty. If you want to raise your hand, Cassidy. There you are. They both graduated in the same class, and Officer Colson had very high regards for Cassidy as well, in talking about her and how she did so well in the police academy. Cassidy accepted a final offer of employment with us before finishing the academy, and tonight I plan on swearing her in. What I will tell you is when I attended the police academy, I noticed as a few representatives from other agencies quickly migrated over to Cassidy because she was quite impressive, and I had to get them to back away. So I am very happy to have her join the team, and I will certainly speak more to this after that. But for now, I'm going to have Cassidy stand up and come to the front here. I'll have you raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Cassidy J. Ruckty, do solemnly swear that I will support and comply with the Constitution of the United States of America.
Do solemnly swear that I will support and comply with the Constitution of the United States of America,
The Constitution and laws of the state of Wisconsin,
the Constitution and laws of the state of Wisconsin,
the charter, laws, and ordinances of the Village of Oregon,
the charter, laws, and ordinances of the Village of Oregon,
the rules and regulations of the Village of Oregon Police Department,
the rules and regulations of the Village of Oregon Police Department,
and the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics,
and the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of my office as a sworn police officer with the Oregon Police Department.
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of my office as a sworn officer of the Oregon Police Department,
And I will assume my duties as of June 6, 2022.
and I will assume my duties as of June 6, 2022.
We're going to have Mom put her badge on for her.
No pressure. Just like the prom.
and I just had a few other things to share, if that's all right.
Sure.
So, in the last month, I received an email out of the blue from our village prosecutor with the Oregon Municipal Court. His name is Tim Spearschneider. I've worked with him for a very long time. And this email consisted of an attachment from a news article written by an author from Milwaukee Journal, dated May 9th, 2022. And he talks about women in law enforcement, and specifically women chiefs. And I've gotten that question quite a bit. You know, how many female chiefs are there in the state of Wisconsin? I had no idea. You know, you just get so busy, and especially in Dane County, as diverse as we are, there's just not a lot of females in law enforcement, let alone in command level. So it was interesting, the article, and I think the numbers have changed slightly, but in essence, the article said, women make up 12% of sworn officers and 3% of police leadership in the United States. And narrowing it down to Wisconsin, there are 22 female chiefs that account for nearly 5% of all police chiefs in Wisconsin. Yeah, obviously, I'm one of the 5%, but now what, right? We have this diversity, we have this advantage, but now what do we do with it? What we've been able to accomplish in the police department in the last 2 years is we've been able to double those numbers. We've gone from 2, which was myself and Sergeant Cindy Niehaus, which most of you know her, to now we have hired Officer Nydia Navarro, who was my first hire as police chief, and I couldn't have asked for a better hire. And now Officer Cassidy Ruckty. That's a huge accomplishment. And the work's not done. We're gonna continue to add to this diversity in a very, very competitive profession right now. I had this big speech prepared, but I'm just gonna speak from the heart and keep it short. When I started in this profession 20 years ago, I had listed a reference when I applied. I had no idea what she would say about me, but I thought, you know what? Whoever's gonna hire me and is gonna put this trust in me needs to know the truth. So I gave them someone that I thought would speak the truth. And I found out later after the fact that the background investigator asked quite an odd question. And it was, is Jenny the type of person that when, for example, running with a pack of wolves, will she run alongside the pack or will she fall behind? And without hesitation, this reference said, oh, she'll lead the pack. Just get out of her way. I couldn't believe she said that. I was blown away. But clearly she recognized something in me 20 years ago that I didn't know, but now here I am. When I think back about that, I have to smile because that's exactly how I describe Officer Navarro and Officer Ruckty. And I am incredibly proud, and Sergeant Niehaus. I just haven't seen her in a while. She's been on leave. That's exactly how I describe these women. And I am incredibly honored to serve with them. And I know the men in the back and then the men in our police department that couldn't make it tonight are just as proud. You know, I look at the 4 of us, and it's interesting. There's one commonality that just is profound when you look at the 4 of us and what is similar about the 4 of us. And it's our mothers. We have these mothers who have built us up to be successful, to be strong, to be confident in who we are. And I have had talks with each one of my staff, and that's there. It's just awesome. We as women at the Oregon Police Department know what it feels like to be built up. And, you know, Jenna had talked at a previous meeting about leading by example. Our agency is going to do exactly that for this community when it comes to women in policing and women in leadership roles and women stepping forward and doing something big with their lives where it may be challenging. People ask me, you know, what is it like stepping in the role of a police chief and supervising all of these men? What's it like? Is it unique in some way? There is no other group of people I would rather work with, and they are the #1 reason I wanted to be the police chief here, was because of the men and women that I get to work with and lead. You know, people ask, are you supported? Look at them. They're wonderful people. I've attended a lot of these training and conferences where they talk about breaking glass ceilings and, pulling up women to be successful as well once you get up there. And I tell you, the men that I have worked with, I wouldn't be where I'm at without them building me up as well. We're a nation that's so divided, and it's even at the local level. And I've watched as people, even women, tearing down other women. What I will say is the women at the Oregon Police Department, as well as the men, because the men I work with do it, and that is we will build up women in our community and support them. And we're going to find unique ways to do that. So I just wanted to put that out there. And, we're talking about women in policing, but really this is diversity. This is a win. We doubled our women in this department. And women in policing, it's so difficult. But we're not done. We are going to add more diversity as we move forward. So I just want to thank all of my staff for their support, and I look forward to watching as Officer Navarro and Officer Ruckty move forward in their careers as well.
Chief, can I ask, we often do this, can I ask if Cassidy would like to say
Yes.
something?
Yes.
She doesn't have to, you don't have to, Cassidy. But, do you want to come up? Why don't you come up to the mic? It's kind of something we do, and I think it's, yeah. Not to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I just have to say that going through the academy and being pre-serviced, I was always told that I was in a great position, that I had so many departments I could choose from, and I was showing my ambition and drive to enter this career. And I do have to say that right away, when I was looking at different departments and stuff and applying and interviewing and everything, one of the things that drove me to Oregon was you, Chief, that having other women in this department and, in the highest role in the department just provides a lot of inspiration. And I know she's opening up like windows and doors for women in the law enforcement career, and I hope to do the same with mine. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll go to 4B, which is presentation from the Oregon Public Library project team on the status of the project.
Thank you, Randy.
Glad I got to be here for that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So last time we were here, we were sharing a conceptual design update. The conceptual design was submitted for cost estimation. So we have Jeff Fine, who's our owner's representative, and we have Brett Rottinghouse from OPN Architects. And so they're going to update you on the status of the project after that last update, and we'll be open to any feedback you have after their information is shared.
So good evening. I'm Jeff Fine. I'm the owner's representative for the new library. And this is Brett Rottinghouse from OPN. He's our architect. We hoped to be back to visit you guys with some updated renderings and having our plans further along. But unfortunately, we're kind of in the middle of a significant redesign effort. As Jennifer said in the information that you saw in the memo, we went out and had a professional estimating firm do the first estimate for the project at schematic design. And admittedly, there isn't a full set of construction documents for them to be able to do that. So it's there's a little bit of back and forth to get that estimator to understand exactly what we're trying to get at, and vice versa, assumptions that they're making and putting into the estimate that we have to review with them and kind of figure out what they were thinking when they were doing the estimate. But we are significantly, the estimate came back significantly over budget. So the funds that we have available are north for the construction portion of our development budget are north of 10 million, so roughly 10 million two, somewhere in that neighborhood. We continue to increase that through additional fundraising and other things, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. And the estimate that came back was roughly 15 million one. So, you know, I'm used to projects at this phase of design being 10% over budget or even 20% over budget, and we kind of expect that. And then it's time to kind of refine things and work through where we're at and get to where, when the project's ready to go to construction, we've worked those things out of the system. In this instance, it was a shock, I think, to everybody. And so we should talk about that for a little bit, because, you know, even when we were talking about escalation, when we had the time frame that we were looking at different site selection, you know, people were talking about 4% per year inflation for construction. That was before we started hearing about 8% inflation, you know, overall for just the general economy. And so in the last 2 years, the most significant construction increases have happened in my lifetime, certainly in my 35-year career. And the last 24 months were the most significant. And because construction costs are going up exponentially, the last 6 months of construction cost increase is as much as it was the prior 18 months. So at some point, this has to give. We don't know if it's going to give between now and when we're going to bid the project out, and we can't rely on the fact that we think construction pricing is going to normalize or it's maybe going to come down, because we're trying to get this project designed and go to construction still in October. So we have to deal with the information that we have available at the time, and what our estimator is telling us, that this is what the market, this is what's happening in the market, you know, right now today. And so back to the 4%, 8%, 10%, what construction pricing is very opportunistic. So contractors are very much aware if they need work, if they don't need work, if they have too much work, if they have too much work to do with the people that they have available, very sensitive to that. So yes, material prices change, and yes, there's labor increases, but I don't know of any tradespeople that have had 50% increases in their wages in the last 24 months. The construction firms that I know are still increasing labor at the same rate that they were before. Maybe they'd be lucky if it was 4 or 6%. So there's something happening, and what's happening is that the difference between needing work and having way too much work, and the work actually starts to become a risk because you don't have enough good people to handle the work, and you start thinking about work as a bad thing, you apply a different fee to that. So the difference between no work and, you know, having too much work, that could be a 25% difference in subcontractor pricing. And in the environment that we're in right now, maybe it's a 50% increase in the fee that they're putting on that project because they don't need it and they don't want it. And then other things that are happening, like the major electrical materials for a project, switchgear and the main service and all of those things that cost, you know, tens, $50,000, all of those types of materials in the last year have doubled in cost and have extraordinary lead times where people are having to pay even more money to be able to get those materials for projects in time. So it's unreal. I've never seen it. And I can't believe that we'll see something like this again. But that's, you know, that's what we're in the midst of. So what we did with that roughly $5 million that we had, the library went through, and I think this quick summary of items was in your packet. But the library went through and took roughly $4 million out of that estimate. Probably $2 million of that $4 million was a combination of things that the estimator was making assumptions for, that were incorrect, or maybe just items that needed to just come out of the budget. You know, you realize, okay, that doesn't make any sense, we don't need that much of that, or we don't need to have certain items, and so we took that out. A couple $1 million of that $2 million is things that we had to change that are significant, that we're taking away from certainly what we hoped we could do for the library, but again, that's, you know, what you can afford is what you can afford. But there's some significant items to look at there. You know, the first thing on the list is reducing the square footage of the building by 5,000 square feet, which is 15%. So we had been talking all along that we were going to try to have 5,000 square foot expansions planned for the building, so we had 10,000 square feet of future expansion. Well, right now, we're reducing the building by 15% to get the budget. So not only have we maybe taken away from what we need for the future, we're squeezing what we need today. But to get to the significant dollars that we had to get to, we had to take that out. Another thing that's happening is that we changed the structure of the building from a structural steel frame with metal stud exterior and metal stud interior to maybe a little bit of structural steel, but mostly a wood frame structure for the interior, exterior. As much of the building as possible is going to be a wood frame structure. You know, things are built out of wood every day, but that's a different type of structure than a structural steel concrete frame building, as far as, you know, needing to understand how that's going to function over the long term. Is there a question on that?
Yeah, on that one. The question I had on that is, what does that do to the longevity of the building?
Well, you know, the pyramids were built out of stone and they're still here. There's lots of wood frame buildings that, I guess I wouldn't say that that's a 100-year building, but we're hoping that we can do it correctly. There's lots of engineered type wood products that are available. You know, we're not going to frame interior walls with regular SPF studs, you know, the crooked 2x4s that you see at Home Depot. We're going to maybe use engineered studs and sill plates and things to try to control the shrinking and those things that happen. But it's something, I mean, part of what we want to have happen tonight is we want everybody to understand what's happening here and what we did. If there's something that we can do to help with that or offset that, then yes, our preference would be, you know, to go back to the way that we had it before. And then a couple of other items. The underside of the roof deck in the two-story lobby area or on the second floor of the building, we had planned to have a real wood product be that, you know, decking underneath that roof structure system. And but it's more economical to change to just a regular, for lack of a better term, kind of like a corrugated metal deck. And then we would put, you know, different architectural elements, maybe some ACT ceilings or drywall ceilings below that to help conceal it a little bit and maybe leave the rest of that steel structure open. That's certainly an aesthetic change that'll be fairly significant. And then, you know, in the reduction of the square footage of the building, the kind of grand two-story lobby with the openness all the way through the building, out the back of the building, that's changed, and the amount of area that we have that's open is quite a bit smaller, and part of that square footage of that lobby is what has gone away, and part of the square footage that went away is a fairly good-sized piece of the children's wing. And so a strategy for that is that we're going to identify that as an alternate when we bid the project, that potentially we could find funds where we could add that back. That would probably be the first thing that we would want to add back, would be that square footage. And then again, in the items for the library, a lot of these other things aren't as big or significant, maybe don't necessarily change the overall feel or aesthetic or the quality of the building, but, you know, we've cut in a number of areas to get to that number. And, you know, you can see the things that are on the list, like standard, you know, regular, more residential asphalt shingles for our big gabled roof, you know, in lieu of metal panel or some other larger format type shingle. And then a significant amount of glass and changing the glass system. So we had aluminum storefront and curtain wall, which is a more, I guess, commercial type application, and we're talking about switching that to some sort of wood-clad aluminum window product that's a little bit more residential. On that, we think we can figure out a way to kind of design around that and just kind of go with that and change the feel for the building. But there's certainly going to be a lot less glass and there'll be a lot less metal. And then at the exterior of the building, I guess one on the list we'll get to the things that we're kind of fighting to keep in is just the general overall feel of the exterior is going to get to be a lot more residential, I guess, material elements. So I don't know if there's anything else that's maybe worth talking about on that list. And I don't know if anybody has any specific questions about what's in that first section or that first $4 million, because I think what we really want to talk about is the items that we're struggling with that we don't want to take out of the building, which is the second list.
Anybody? Phil, and then Mike?
Approximately, and you probably can't answer this now, but if you can, that's great. The amount saved by reducing it to, changing from steel frame to wood, and how that compares to the reduction of 5,000 square feet.
Well, we looked at those things separately. The first thing that we did is we went through and we changed materials and went through the value engineering process. So we, you know, less expensive carpeting and we reduced square footage of window, and we did those types of things where we were kind of, you know, bringing the budget down. When we got done with that, we still weren't there. So we said, well, the only thing we have left now is we need less of it. So the 5,000 square foot reduction came as a result of needing to have another, you know, $1 million worth of reduction in the estimate. So that happened after. So I guess your question is, how do those things relate? But changing the structural steel frame to wood, the way that it was, the size that it was originally designed, that was about $750,000. It's structural steel, but then it's all of the exterior metal studs and the interior metal studs, all of those elements, all changing to some sort of a wood product.
Okay.
So we made that change first, and then eventually we got around to the square foot reduction.
Great.
Did I answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, so in addition to, I share Amanda's concern about building longevity, a lot of what you're putting in there are materials that aren't going to last as long, like cheaper carpeting, et cetera. What is the expectation for increased maintenance costs on this facility going forward?
I don't know if we've necessarily thought about that as far as an ongoing maintenance. You know, we're trying to value engineer in a smart way so that we're not creating problems for the future, and we're not, you know, putting in products that don't perform. But a wood frame building does move, so maybe there's, you know, those types of repairs that need to be done on a periodic basis. And I don't know if I want to say that we're going to put other materials in there that would significantly have a lesser life, but.
Okay.
Sure.
So, and Jeff, sorry, I'm Brett. Jeff kind of touched on this a little bit. Some of these changes would have inevitably come to light even if the budget wasn't an issue. For instance, the windows. We would have probably urged to make that happen anyway, because it's just a better feeling type window than sitting next to an aluminum window system. It's very cold, whereas like a wood window system has a much different feel to it. It's much nicer to sit next to. So those were also some things that we tried to keep in mind as we were going through the value engineering process. What are the easy ones right off the bat that we know that we can make and change to this design that we would have done anyway? Then we had to go into the next level or levels as we went through it. So those were some things that we tried to keep in mind as we were going through it.
Other questions about the first list of items before we get to the second piece?
Carlene and
I'll wait.
So, reducing the size by 5,000 square feet, how much larger still are we than the library that we have now?
The current library is about 10,500 square feet. And then, Brett, I think the current version that we're aiming for is about 30,000 square feet.
So still, like, multiples of what we have now.
It's about 20,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Is it
Go ahead.
Derek or
I'm patient. I would.
Jenna? What?
Okay.
Either one.
I'm gonna start with a clarifying question. When you say 20,000 feet larger, that's before the 5,000 foot reduction or after?
After.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, so we went from roughly 10 to 30, the existing library is roughly 10.
Yes,
The new reduced is roughly 30.
okay, thank you. I just want to echo everybody's concerns, or the concerns that I'm hearing about, I appreciate and I understand that some of the value engineering will naturally occur, but I think one of the consistent themes that we've talked about with this library is building a library that's going to last 80 to 100 years. And so when I hear we're going to put residential type whatever's in there or value engineer fixtures, and then I think about the level of use that they're going to be getting over those years, I echo the comments made about, how's that going to impact our maintenance costs in the future? How's that going to impact the longevity of the building? If we're spending all our money in the future on maintaining it, the feasibility of actually expanding those additional square footage in the future makes me wonder. So those are some things that are going through my mind as I'm hearing this list.
Sure.
All right, Derek?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I can't help but notice on Part B, you have a dollar estimate next to each one of the proposed engineering cuts, if you will. Is there a similar list for Part A where it's broken down for each element? And
There
so
is,
can we get
right, there is. The differences between the two lists are the first list is kind of decisions that the design team is making.
that?
And the second list is decisions that we need to make collectively, and so you need more specific information. We can get you the list for the first portion. I didn't want to spend an hour on that tonight before we get to the second piece, so that's why we don't have that
I understand, but I'd
available at the moment.
Yeah, I'd appreciate getting that going forward.
Okay.
My only other question is align landscaping allowance with owner expectations. Can you kind of define that a little bit more clearly? For me?
Well, I mean, in rough terms, there's a significant amount of retaining wall, and there was a fairly expensive material estimated for that. And then there was just a significant amount of landscaping, number of plantings, trees, So, and we're not talking about restoration dollars for the site. We're talking about plants that are being planted in that type of more traditional landscaping around the building. The budget for that was $300,000. The budget for the stone retaining walls was somewhere in that neighborhood. So those are things where we just looked at it, took what the estimator gave us and said, we're not gonna have a budget for $300,000 for landscaping. We're maybe gonna have a budget of $150,000 for that type of landscaping, and we'll have to figure out how to, get that design to work. So some of it was, feedback to the estimator of, okay, you imagine something that's not happening here, or you maybe missed the mark on what your assumptions were.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? All right, you want to go to that
Sure.
next section?
So, you know, we get through all of that. We're already making changes that I'm sure different people with different perspectives are concerned about. But we feel like to get that $4 million out, we can figure out how to make that work. But we're still not, to our budget. So the question becomes, well, where do we come up with another $1 million that we need to take out of the project? So these are things that we know are important to the community, and then there's a couple things on this list that are just, I think, important for people to realize how far we're going with the reduction in the design of the exterior of the building and other things, where we don't want to go too far past the line here. And so maybe we need to find ways to help offset those items instead of making the decision to take them out. And these are items that we're struggling with, and these are items that we want to have input from the village board and plan commission and our building committee before we make decisions that these types of things are going to come out. So the first thing on the list is geothermal, and we know that has been talked about for a long time. Unfortunately, it's also one of those items that to the end user, when they walk into the library, at the grand opening to experience the library, you don't necessarily know that that's happening behind the scenes. So when we're talking about value engineering and trying to produce a product and an experience and a level of, what the vision is for this library, that's something that could go away and it wouldn't significantly change that, other than people asking the question, hey, do we have that type of, those things incorporated because they're important to this community and we specifically wanted them in there. So, one perspective is like, well, you wouldn't miss it. The other perspective is, we really want those types of things in our municipal facilities in the Village of Oregon, so it is very important to us. But it's a significant dollar amount. And since we submitted this to Martin last week, we're realizing that part of the space that we took out when we kind of shrunk everything down with our floor plan, we actually have to put space back. We would have to put space back for the geothermal system so that we have room for all the pumps and things that need to be inside the building in the mechanical room. So in addition to the 285, there's additional cost for that space, and maybe that's another couple $100,000. So it's probably more accurate from where we cut back to put that back is closer to $500,000 than the 285. But we'll get that figured out. A couple of these things, what we're thinking about is that, we can have a bid alternate on bid day. I mean, like the green roof is a good example. We can show that on the plans, we can define what it is, we can have a quantity, and we can tell the contractor, give us an alternate bid for green roof. Everybody writes in a number on the bid form, and we know what the value of that is. If we have a good day on bid day, maybe we add that alternate when we go to contract with the contractor. If we don't use all of our construction contingency, maybe we add that as a change order to the contractor along the way, and we have green roof on the roof before the end of the project. The problem with the geothermal is and we talked about this, if we tried to create that as a bid alternate so that we would have that flexibility to wait until October to see, one, have we been able to come up with some additional funds, or does construction pricing change and the bid comes in and we have money to add that alternate back in? The problem, to be able to do that, we'd have to design two different HVAC systems, basically. There's a significant change in the design of the electrical depending on whether we have the geothermal or not. So we have to basically do engineering drawings for both scenarios. We would have to bid both scenarios. And if we don't end up having funds for geothermal, then we have this sunk cost of going through this exercise of trying to figure out how to do this alternate. So I think geothermal is an item that needs to be decided right away, of whether that's gonna be in or gonna be out, because we really can't, there's so much involved that we have to know basically now, moving forward with the design on that item. The solar PV, that I think is easier for us to bid as an alternate. We're gonna make some relatively small dollar amount provisions to rough in to be able to accept that. We'll space plan for it. And then we're gonna have IMEG design. IMEG is our mechanical engineer. We're gonna have them design a solar PV system that we think is roughly $100,000 worth of array. And then we'll kind of back into the space planning for that, and then we can include that on bid day and say, okay. The other thing that we've got going on is we have grants that Jennifer's working on for PV, and if we get good news with one of those grants, maybe 3 weeks from now, we'll put all the PV back in because we found funding for that. But that and the green roof will be easy to be handled as alternates. The next two on the list, and I guess maybe these are the things that I'm, me personally, concerned about, just because it's hard to imagine what this thing's gonna look like or where we were headed with it anyway, but I know Brett knows where we're headed with some of the exterior stuff, and it's a different feel. It's going to be a different, I guess, level of what people are maybe expecting to see for this municipal building that's supposed to be the 100-year building. If we start getting more residential with what's happening with the exterior, it just starts to take away from that. So, items that we're talking about is we're reducing the masonry on the building to only 25% of the exterior. We've, changed the window system to a more residential window system already. And then we're talking about some sort of cement board panel siding material or something else that's a more residential material to make up the rest of that square footage on the exterior. It would be nice if we kept that to be, masonry, whether it's brick. Originally, we wanted more stone and more metal panel. It's just a different flavor. And it is, that type of residential exterior maybe is a maintenance issue at some time in the future. And then we do have some significant retaining walls where we step down in the parking lots. We wanted that to be kind of a larger format natural stone. And it's, there's significant cost there. So we can reduce that by $100,000 to come up with a more man-made retaining wall material. But again, it's one of those things that once you do it, it's going to be there forever. And it very much is going to be something that you're going to see. It's going to be a prominent change in what's happening on the exterior of the building. With that item, we were talking with Randy, maybe we'll go find some people that supply that type of material. Maybe we'll direct purchase it and see if we can get some help and support with that. And, we're open to what kind of stone it might be, but, depending on who we're talking to, maybe they have something that they've got a lot of material available in one of their quarries, and we can kind of work that out. Maybe we can work something out with the same kind of supplier for the masonry exterior materials, and if we can make some of those types of deals and now we can afford more of that, Brett will be happy to add those things back, basically a brick at a time to the exterior to, put this space back to a more all masonry exterior. So, that's that list. And so the strategies are, find ways to raise more money, find ways to buy those things, figure out a way that we can put these things back. We can probably live with the first list. The second list is where it's getting tough, and maybe we need other ways to deal with that final $1 million. So are there questions about this second list?
So Jennifer, I think it's important that the board knows, Jennifer's been busy with fundraising. Jennifer, talk about the couple grants that so the board knows. I mean, we don't have them in hand, but
Oh,
what
No,
the,
so we've been applying for grants left and right, but it doesn't help us unless we get funding.
yeah, but
so-
I think it's important that the board knows that there's been some movement. We did $2 million grants, one to Senator Baldwin's office, which has made it past the first round, and we also did one to Congressman Pocan's office to do basically an earmark.
There are significant grants for solar. That's the one category where there are lots of grant opportunities. So we have one grant application we're supposed to hear about in June, and we can apply next year again and still have that be considered with a stronger application once we have the actual PV system designed. There's also some new opportunities through the Wisconsin Public Service Commission Energy of Innovation, or Office of Energy Innovation grant that we can apply for in October. There's a number that at least, and I have walked through, there's some through Dane County that Amanda put us in touch with. So there's lots of grant opportunities for solar, but for other grants are really hard to come by. So that's the one.
Yeah, I just want the board to know that Jennifer's been working hard to look for other funds. And, you know, we don't have it, but maybe, hopefully, we'll cross our fingers that maybe could help some of these things that we think we might have to take out, maybe we can put back in, but.
And that's a good point too. The funding Jeff's talking about is based on the dollars we have today and assumes that we raise no additional dollars. We didn't want to have any of this be speculative on funds that we didn't have available or committed. And so any dollars raised between now and the end of the project would be, you know, something the village board could consider part of the project budget. But we just didn't want to put anything in there that wasn't secure.
Okay. Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah, the geothermal is my biggest hang-up right now because I feel like that's really important, and I feel like the solar panels go with that, because the way you make the geothermal cost-effective is to have the free energy from the solar panels running the pumps. If you don't have that and you're paying for the electricity, then it takes longer to pay off that thing, but I feel like that's the way we're gonna help save money in the future, and that's the hardest thing that I'm having trouble with on this, and I'm wondering if we might wanna talk about as a board, finding the funds for geothermal at least, and then hope that a solar panel, grant comes through, and that would make it more cost effective. And that's gonna help with long-term costs for energy for the library, so.
Yeah, to put the geothermal and the PV in perspective, you know, when we're doing all this math, that's like another 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet that would have to come out of the building if we don't find funds for that and we put that back in with the constraint that we have, then something else has to come out somewhere else. So that's why it gets to be a tough decision, is we've squeezed the square footage as much as we can. I think Jennifer and Brett have been up day and night trying to figure out how to get this new reduced footprint to work out in the revised floor plans. And I don't know where we would be able to come up with another 1,200 square feet to come out, you know, to pay for that. But we understand that it's important, so.
Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I want to echo what Amanda said. I mean, to me, the geothermal, the solar saves us money in the long run. If this building's actually going to function for 100 years, this will pay itself back many times, hopefully. So I'm kind of, my take on it is the easiest thing that the library can do to raise money out of all the systems, going and hitting people up to raise money for, oh gee, we want a solar panel, is going to be a hard sell. Going to people and saying, hey, we want to expand the library to add this function to it, I think you would get more donors. And I would rather see, rather than compromising the long-term efficiency of the building, compromising We just set up a sustainability committee to, you know, the best time to do sustainability is when you're building the building, not trying to retrofit it on later on. I would rather see the library be smaller, and we're tripling the size of it now. I realize, Jennifer, that you have programs for all of these spaces, but we're tripling it. I would rather see it smaller and added onto, and I would rather, in the future, and I would rather see us not compromise the stone exterior and things of the building, or the brick exterior of the building, in ways that are going to cost us money in the future. I would rather put that money in place now, even if we have to live with a smaller facility that doesn't give us 100% of everything we wanted, maybe only gives us 85%, and we'll add on when we have the money in the future.
Okay. Derek, did you have your hand up, Derek?
Yeah.
Derek and then Carly.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing's kind of disappointing, not surprising, but disappointing. And just to kind of echo, this whole building was kind of sold on the oneness with nature and the green initiatives that went along with it. So I think especially cutting out these, the geothermal and the solar panels on the Part B is not really the way that I would like to see this go. Again, looking long-term, those are the ones, like Mike said, that are gonna kind of save us money in the long run. And I too, as much as I hate to see a reduction in square footage, those two components, I think the community was pretty adamant about, and keeping the building sustainable. And as I think it was later on in this agenda, we're discussing putting the green initiatives as part of our TIF ordinances, and I struggle with the village not following the same path that we're going to be talking about making other people follow. So I think that really needs to be considered to be kept in. I'm not sure where the additional cuts are going to be made, but those two items in particular I would like to see kept.
Okay, Carleen.
Yeah, I really don't have anything new to add, except to say I strongly support making the building as sustainable as possible, and I think that those two elements that everybody here has spoken about are absolutely fundamental to that. It is definitely, I mean, all of this is, again, not surprising, given how much building costs are escalating, and is very disappointing for everybody. And I don't think any of us like seeing anything on this list being cut. But I echo sustainability as a top priority. And so I think we need to do everything we can to keep that in.
Yeah, Jenna.
So, like everybody here, I also echo the desire to keep geothermal and PV panels. From my recollection, those two particular issues were a main driver to why we increased the level of funding that the village was going to be giving back in 2021, was that? I think it was. Because we wanted to make sure that we were building a building that was going to be sustainable, but also, again, when we talked about building this building, that we also wanted a building that was going to last for a significant amount of time. And I love the idea of putting it out there that we could potentially fundraise for these particular issues, but I also know that Jennifer and her team have been working significant amounts of time to bring this building to fruition, and I'm just concerned about adding another thing to their plate, having just finished a large fundraising campaign. I'm also concerned about talking about a reduction in square footage, a more reduction. You know, if that's where we have to go, that's where we have to go. But I think we need to really be thoughtful about that, because one of the things that I remember from multiple library presentations is that shortly after we built this past one, within a few years, we were already knowing that we had undersized it. And that has led us to beating even this particular library in the size that it is. And I don't want to put us in the same position that we promised the community we would not do 4 years ago when this first started. So while I know none of those are answers to the issues that we have, I just want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in these corners that we had found ourselves in when we first started these discussions.
Okay, yeah, Matt.
Just wanted to ask a question. I think I heard you talk about potentially acquiring materials directly in a way to maybe save some money on some of the costs. And I just wanted to suggest that make sure we consider the public bidding laws when you're thinking about that. Not sure exactly what you have in mind, but I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, understood.
Yep.
So just to, I guess, add to what you said, so, what I'm hearing, and I understand that we need to find a way to fund the sustainability things and put them back. But to do that, we're gonna be reducing what we think was the right size for the building for the future, and all of the things that the community wanted in the building. We're gonna be reducing the building by 20%. Day one, that's what we're gonna build. And the other thing that's gonna happen is that we're gonna have to, we are gonna have to reduce the exterior design, material elements, and we're gonna have to reduce interior design elements as well. So I just want everybody to understand that if we're picking all of those things have to happen, then it's, it comes from somewhere, so.
And I
Yeah,
guess
Jenna.
I'd like to see an analysis on what that does to the reduction of the longevity of the life of the building. And like we talked about, future maintenance costs, how much shorter time we'll have to start replacing fixtures, furniture, equipment, because I think in the end, the community wants the building done right. And I think that's a priority for me, because again, to come back in just a few years and say, oh, well, we overlooked X, Y, Z, and now we need more money, I think the first question is, why didn't we do it right in the first place? So I think we need to really be focusing on that.
Understood.
Yeah.
I guess but that is the question, right, for tonight, is where do we come up with the money to do that? So yes, we'd all like to have everything in the building, but if we don't have $2 million to spend during construction, we don't have $2 million to spend during construction. So that's what we're trying to get at is what are potential solutions, I guess, for funding these items.
So it looks like for those two items, if I did my math, like about $415,000 for the solar and the geothermal.
Yeah, the geothermal number is higher than what's on here
Okay.
just for the HVAC. There's electrical and then the building square footage too. So it's probably $500,000 for those two items. And then, there's another $400,000 in the exterior elements that I'm hoping we can find, so.
Jenna, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay. I just wanted to acknowledge that I hear what you're saying, Jeff, and I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't have enough information to make a decision because I don't know how, reducing the square footage or changing these exterior things will impact the longevity of the building, will impact these future maintenance costs that we're talking about, which is a conversation that has been had throughout the community since we started talking about the library. So before I could suggest where I'd want those dollars, how I would like that to be shifted or how we would solve this problem in order to build the right building, I would need more information.
Sure.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Anybody else? Oh, Phil, I'm sorry. Phil, you
Well,
had-
just summarize some of what I'm gonna say, but, I'm absolutely in favor of the geothermal and the PV, and I do think it needs to go in. I am concerned about switching to a wood structure, and I know engineered wood is much better than what it used to be, but the fact of the matter is it's not gonna be 125-year building. So, there are some smaller numbers and bigger numbers here, but I think what they're asking us, and I'm not asking anybody to answer this, but basically what they're saying is, if you want the geothermal, and you want the PV, and you want a building that's going to last, then we're going to have to reduce the square footage. And I think those are the only two choices we have. So, and I think that's what we're being asked. I think if you get into the fixtures or the exteriors, those things can be upgraded and improved later on. It's the square footage is the big ticket here, and that's the one we're gonna have to deal with.
Derek and then Amanda, and then
Just
Mike.
kind of to go off of Phil's thoughts there, part of the reason that we moved the library to its new location is with future expansion in mind. We now have a 7-acre lot, or just short of 7 acres, in which some of these future square feet can be added to. That was, like I say, a huge part of the argument for moving it out there. We have that space available now. If we need to reduce the building size to make it the sustainable building we want, I mean, it can always be added on to. And I realize that's not ideal, but I think that's where we're at.
Okay, Amanda, and then Mike.
Yeah, reducing the square footage, I mean, it hurts me because we need the space. But one of the things the community said to us, in addition to the sustainability, is that we need the meeting space. That was the whole point. You know, those larger areas and the smaller meeting rooms, all of that is what goes into it. It's not like we can't fit the collection into a smaller building. That's not the issue. It's the spaces where people gather and spend time. The only thing I can think of is that maybe if we reduced the square footage now, it's hard. It's hard to go back and add on to a building, so I'm aware of that. But maybe by the time we decide we need to do that, the prices will have come down. I don't know what the future is going to hold. I mean, we can't hold back on building the library. We have to move forward with this project. But if we reduce the square footage a little more, then we might be in a position later to add on. It's not ideal at all.
You mean
because
later years from now, or later?
Later years from now.
Okay.
I don't want to build a library that's too small either, but we're in this like sort of perfect storm of events and things that have happened where the prices they're crazy high. I mean, this inflation is ridiculous, but you know, here we are, and we have to do something about it, and we have to move forward with the project. So I feel like sustainability is the way to go, because putting the geothermal in, it'll already be there when we want to add on. I mean, it's really hard to go back and add geothermal. You want that in at the beginning. So slightly, as little as possible, reducing the square footage, and it pains me to say that, might be the best option here.
All right, Mike? Oh,
Yeah,
Yep, yeah,
I-
Elise.
Just, go ahead. I
No,
had
go
a
ahead.
question about the geothermal system. So with a geothermal system as it's designed, is that meant to serve a certain square footage? Would it be, or would it be sized to be able to handle an expanded building in the future? And I guess how would that impact interior space, or would that also be part of a future addition? You have a new wing in the library and you add another, blob onto your geothermal field.
Right, yeah. Well, I guess the first answer would be that it's not very easily expandable, but we'd have to look into how we can do that. It's gonna be, the system's gonna be designed for the square footage that we end up building, and we certainly don't have any money to build in what-if potential future, so things need to be right-sized as well. So it's not as easy to expand that in the future as people might think.
All right, Mike, and then Jenna.
Yeah, I agree with both what Derek and Amanda both raised. Brett, when you design a building, it's possible to design for future expansion, right? I mean, you're planning this in already. We've got the space out there. So I don't know that you make each area proportionately smaller or you leave something out, but it seems like at some point, with some thoughtful presentation here, we could get by with enough to get us through the next few years, and then, as budget and need present themselves, we could add on to this library.
Yes, first thing I would say is it's never as efficient, because you're paying a contractor twice to come out, right, to mobilize to the project. We can design it to a certain level to be expanded, but we never go through and fully design out the the complete addition, right? We identify where the additions are going to be in the future, but we don't design it to the same level that we do the rest of the building. But yes, we always try to conceptualize what the building is going to look like if we expand it, or when it is expanded.
All right, Jenna? You want,
I was gonna ask a clarifying question.
all right, we can go back to you. Amanda?
Yeah, well, so the other option is to find more money for this project. And I know as a board, we've talked about how strapped we are, you know, like we are borrowing a lot, and we have the senior center that we have yet to build, and, you know, things are coming up we're only gonna be doing more of. Now that you have some concrete figures, which we didn't necessarily have before at this location, this is the first time we're hearing about, you know, the costs of some of these and how much we have to cut. Is it conceivable that we could find $500,000-$600,000 somewhere, or borrow that money to include the geothermal and the solar? I mean, that's, as a board, can we,
You can always make that decision, yep.
I mean, that might be the better option rather than cutting square feet.
And Jennifer, we don't know exactly when we're gonna find out about the other grants.
The solar we'll hear about in the next 3 weeks. The
Okay.
other grants, one of them we won't hear till October, so we would know going into awarding the bid what,
Yeah.
if we get that, but it's hard to know.
Yeah,
I don't wanna
it
count on
is.
anything.
Can't
We've had-
count on it, we don't know.
You know, we've had $2.2 million in community generosity when we know there's some other important community projects that have been, you know, struggling to raise funds. And so to count on fundraising at this point, I think would be very difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
And just to talk a little bit about timing, because maybe not everybody's looking at my schedule on the meeting minutes every week. We're trying to go to construction in the middle of October, because we need to get foundations and we need to get a bunch of work done before January in Wisconsin. The other thing is that it's a 12-month project and we want to deliver it before the holidays at the end of, you know, the following year, because we don't want to be trying to deliver and finish a library in January in Wisconsin either. So we're really under the gun to get started so that we can have a reasonable time frame to finish the project before we run into the winter at the end of the project. So these decisions, these things we need to decide now, because we already have Brett, to a certain extent, is dead in the water with design, as we've had to take a timeout again to go through this exercise. So very quickly after tonight's meeting, we've got to make decisions and we've got to move forward. So without understanding something of some certainty of funding, like the grants, we don't know.
Right.
So to me, those dollars, that's $0.
Mm-hmm.
So then the decision is, okay, these things are coming out. They have to come out now. They have to come out now so that we can have the design done in time to submit to state building review and get a permit by the middle of October. So just so you guys realize where we are in the schedule, we're already out of time and we're behind schedule on design because we had to stop for this process.
All right,
Okay.
Jenna.
Three things
Yeah.
then. Sorry,
Yeah.
didn't add up, because I remember the one thing. So,
Okay.
if I am understanding your comments with your conversation with Elise about the geothermal, should we reduce the size now with the expectation that we increase it in the future? We will then also have to either add on or have a separate geothermal system for that addition.
Yeah.
Which with an unknown cost, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Second question, or second thing, I guess, is, are you expecting a decision from us tonight on what to keep in and out? Because I guess is that what you're
No,
hoping
but
for?
we're hearing what you're saying about the sustainable items, and I guess I haven't heard any relief on the $920,000 list.
Not yet.
Okay, and so very quickly,
Yep.
if we can't scramble and come up with ways to figure out how to direct purchase some retaining wall material for, you know, half the cost of what we had in the budget, then, and, you know, we don't have any money to offset this, then we go back in the formula and we reduce more square footage.
Right.
So, you know, then we're talking about we're at 25% reduction in what we thought was the right size library a month ago. And I understand, and I think that's what we're hearing is like, okay, go do that. But, just like it's hard to build geothermal in the future, it's really hard to, it's really, once you don't build 25% of your square footage, you don't have that either, so.
Sorry, I thought you were
Go
done.
ahead.
How many projects have you been on where they do come back and do a subsequent phase addition later?
My experience is that it doesn't, you don't suddenly have money available to do that. And I think any of the libraries I've been involved with have been wrong sized from the get-go. And I'm talking about the ones that were, renovating or rebuilding from 15 years ago, the same situation. It seems like, for whatever reason, libraries get squeezed. So we're kind of back in that boat again here because of what's happening in the construction market, I guess.
Final question, sorry, don't mean to dominate. To Amanda's point, is there a way to get numbers on what the impacts would be if we were to choose to add dollars to fund these sustainability initiatives?
Yes, yeah, we could have, depending on what amount that would be, we could have that run through Ellers, through our debt management and our financial management plan. And they could show the impact on debt payment, and they could show the impact on our cap, our debt cap as well,
And to the property taxes?
and property taxes too.
Thank you. I would like to see
How
those.
quickly can they do that?
A couple weeks maybe.
Yeah, I would think in a couple weeks to get
Yeah.
that done, maybe.
So
Depends on what they all have going on.
Elise had a comment, and then we can come back here.
I'm hearing a lot of concerns about the longevity of the building and the changes to the materials. Could you just speak maybe broadly about the wood frame structure and then some of the residential materials? Like, overall, how would the life of the building be changed on a steel structure versus a wood structure? And then for some of these materials, would you expect, say it's a 80, 90-year lifespan expected for a building, do those get replaced once or twice during that full lifespan, compared to, I guess, sort of your preference for what we started out with for materials?
Yeah, so the thing about the wood frame building is that it moves constantly with the change of the season. So you're dealing with, drywall cracking and repairs kind of through the life of the building. It's not that significant, but it's something that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that's probably the major, I guess, downfall of the wood structure is that it moves, over time. As far as the exterior materials go, this idea of 75% of the square footage of the exterior siding is some sort of like hardy panel, more residential siding material. That stuff eventually needs to be painted. It eventually needs to be replaced. We're talking about the residential asphalt shingles on the gabled upper roof. It works. I've seen it. I just saw a new church be built, and it was like miles and miles of asphalt shingles. As soon as you see it, you're like, they had to get to their budget. And that's fine. It's just 20 years from now, all those shingles on the building are all coming off and going back on, and it's significant. It's a couple $100,000 worth of shingles that you'll have to replace in the future. The siding's probably on that same order of magnitude. Sometime, 25, 30 years, you're gonna replace that siding. Guess I'm fairly confident in like the Pella window type system, but again, it's not a 100-year material. It's not stone, metal, glass, or aluminum. So, that's the concern with those items.
Jeff, and then Phil.
Okay, I just had a comment, and I mean, we've lived in the village for 17 years, and I remember the original public safety building being built. And I think some of the concerns, the chief can attest to this, is that building, there were some corners that were cut in materials, in HVAC systems. There were some other problems associated with how it was built and that type of thing, but I think you can attest, and I can attest to the amount of money that has been spent in the last, just since I've been here. The roof's been replaced, the entire HVAC system was replaced, I believe that was like $46,000, something like that. The roof was $25,000 a couple years ago. Rudy would remember these numbers, because she's got them all.
Water
But
drainage issues.
water drainage issues, problems with insulation. I think the insulation had
Even
to
the
be
plumbing's
redone,
been an issue.
and the plumbing and stuff.
Toilet-
So,
toilets.
you know, those are the concerns you look at when you start looking at these buildings, and I think you're right on task with not you gotta be careful. It's just like any project, where do you cut, and how's that gonna affect you? We've added on to this building. I think this building originally that we're in here right now is the original 1940 building. There was, I think, in 1984, does that sound right? Where everything kind of from the back wall here over was added, and it's done. It's done. At times it's not ideal, and unfortunately it doesn't always flow really well. That's why we kind of have a tricky building. But those are just things that we've observed, and I know one of the things that previous board members that I heard as we went through the library and everything else is they did not want to repeat mistakes that they made with the police and safety building.
Phil?
I think what I'm hearing from Jeff and Jennifer is to nail down some of these items on this, list B, and, on the Part B list. And it sounds like it's important to us to have the geothermal and the PV, but are we then sending them a message to eliminate the green roof, the glass area, reduce the stone, the other 4 items? Are we sending them a message, or can we send them a message now that those items can go? Or do we also want to spend more time thinking about that?
All right, Derek and then Carleen.
I'd say that I'd be leaning more toward getting the alternate bid on those 4 items as we move forward. I mean, but more than likely just eliminating those 4 items and getting the 2 kind of bigger ticket items on there is what I'm leaning toward anyway.
You read my mind. I mean, I think that we should not rule out some of the things that Jeff said about ways that we might be able to get some of those exterior things that we prefer, but I absolutely agree that we should keep the geothermal and the solar, but for sure the geothermal.
Mike?
Yeah, I know we've had this discussion before, Jennifer, I'm just gonna throw it out there. When this library was planned, we planned a large community room with the idea there was nothing else in the village like that. And I know that the library has intentions to use portions of that room for maybe multiple things at once. But perhaps that might be one of the areas to have a smaller room, a smaller community room, because we're going to have a community room now at the new village hall in addition to the village boardroom. None of that was planned before, and if we're making painful cuts, maybe a community room that's 60% the size might, be a good spot to lose some of that extra space.
We already did downsize it quite significantly, so it's similar size to the community room at the library in Prairie du Sac, where I know some of you were this morning. So, that's kind of right now, it's right size for the library programming that we do, so it's not just for community use, it's also for the significant amount of programming that the library does as well.
Yeah.
So like a lot of children's programming, we have, a lot of our programming right now has to, even before the pandemic, really had to be held off-site. And so we really want to be able to have that in the library to connect children with books and reading, and that's really hard to do when all of your programming is offsite. There's certain offsite programming we'd want to continue for outreach and partnerships with other things like the youth center, the senior center, things like that for those community connections, but we really need that space. If we downsize it too much, we won't be able to use it for certain library functions, and then we're kind of back where we were, without the space at all.
Totally get that. You understand your use much more. I was just gonna throw it out there.
So Lisa and Martin, I just, and I know that we talked about the grant things, but tell me if we borrowed the money to get the solar and the geothermal back, and because there is some urgency here moving forward, if we did get some of these grants, can we pay some of that debt off that we borrowed or not?
So I think what we would do is, so you've already borrowed, was it 6.5 million for the building already over the last 2 years? 7, and so I think there's, what, 3 million left to be borrowed of the original dedicated amount? So we would just add whatever the board wants to add into that final borrowing in 2023, is what I would assume what we would probably do.
So you know where I was going. I was just trying to see how we could, if we did, we're lucky enough, we don't have them, we don't know, but we did get them, we would, I'm
Yeah,
just
so
thinking how we could
I
pay
think-
them back.
I think what we would do is, we'd probably amend the MOU to state that the village board would want to commit to an additional amount, and the library board and village board would sign off on that. And then if we got to a point later this year where we found out, oh, we're going to get
Mhm.
some grants, we don't need to borrow that money in
Okay.
2023, so
Okay.
we don't need to worry about it at that
Okay,
point.
okay.
That was gonna be my question, is when do you need to decide on the 2023 borrowing? Because maybe between now and that date,
Yeah, good point.
It would be till
Not till like February of next year.
So we probably might know something
Something
before
by
then.
October.
Yeah,
that you would just avoid the borrowing.
yeah. That's kind of where I was, how we could,
I like that too.
I mean, we're gonna apply for as much grant funding as we possibly can. I just want you to know that those are not sure things. And I wanna
Yeah.
make sure we're not hedging our bets on money that may not come to fruition, because a lot of the grants available are competitive, and there's lots of folks with really good projects that need funding, so, none
Yeah.
of these are sure things, though we're trying our best to make
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
we're getting the best chances we can.
And that's the other thing I wanted to add to that too, is Jennifer's right. So if we're borrowing additional funding for the library, then that means that there's other projects out there that are gonna get pushed back
Mhm.
a few years. So that's the other thing to think about too.
Yeah, Amanda.
I like that. I think that we can make this work. I mean, I would say, but the thing is, if we're saying to Jeff and to Brett here to proceed with the geothermal and the, like PV and the things that we want, then if those grants don't come through, then we need to, as a board, agree that we're going to fund it. Because if he goes ahead and starts on that premise and then those things don't happen, us backing out, then we're gonna have to make a lot of different harder cuts. So, just to be clear.
And we need to understand that that's gonna impact future senior
Right, and-
center, other things.
Right,
So,
and can we wait the 2 weeks for the Eller's report on how that's gonna affect things? I mean, that's not gonna affect you guys
Yeah,
too much more.
I think what we would need from project team is just, what is that number that the village would need to fill in potentially through extra borrowing? And then we'll take that number to Ellers, they'll run their analysis, and we can get that back to the board. And then we can talk about things like MOUs and commitments and things like that.
Right. And we did, like I said earlier, we spent more time on the geothermal to put it back, including the space that we need. So I think the total for those two items is $600,000, if you want to take a number to go have Ellers look at that. And then, I guess the space that we're putting back for that mechanical space is square footage that we're gonna be taking out somewhere else to put the other items that were on the bottom of the list here. We're trying to keep some of that, so.
All right, so I guess the question is what direction?
Do you need a motion?
Well, I just, where are we? What direction do we want to go?
I think it was to get numbers from Ellers.
Ellers on the borrowing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought that's where it seemed to be going,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we didn't even check with, I mean, is that gonna work? Can you guys wait 2 weeks for that analysis to be done and get a decision?
Well, I think we can. We're gonna move forward with everything else that we have, that we understand what we're doing, and then it's gonna be this geothermal HVAC system is the one that, we can't wait any longer than 2 weeks, I can tell you that, because we have to decide if we're designing that system or not, and we're at that point of decision. So if we can come back and, and hear in 2 weeks that that's funded, then we will catch up that design and we'll move forward with that.
All right, yeah,
And then
Matt.
Just the other thing that I'm hearing then is that everything else that's been presented as being eliminated is eliminated. The only thing that you're talking about,
Those two
trying
things.
to preserve at this point would be the geothermal and the solar. The wood, going from steel to wood, everything else you've heard.
Everything on list A.
That was already
Yeah,
decided.
so
That's
is
already
that-
done.
Well, I just wanna make sure everyone's clear on
Yeah.
that, because we came back to the wood
Yeah,
discussion a
yeah.
few times, and
We-
I wasn't sure where that was going.
Okay.
It's a painful
So
pill.
Martin, I think we want a motion because we're talking about,
It's not noticed for action.
pardon?
Not noticed.
This
It's not
item is
noticed for action.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I think we
Amanda.
understand that we're letting go of that initial list, because I don't think, and I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I don't know that we can go back and say, let's add $2 million to the project, because we're reaching our borrowing limits. We have other projects coming. I don't think the public would be thrilled with that. I think we need to kind of say, okay, we've said 10 million. If we really want to be sustainable, we could probably argue for that extra 600,000, but I don't think we can. I think we have to cut your initial list, and I'm okay with that. It's not great, but I don't love it. But I think that's what the board is saying. If I'm wrong, say so.
And if somebody would have asked, what's the number for us to be somewhat happy with what we're doing here and have it be what we wanted it to be, the number was about $2 million. So, that's $1.4 million and stuff that it's gotta go, and it's not a good situation, but that's the situation that we're in.
So I think if I understand, so I think what's being asked is to analyze an additional 600,000 of borrowing of the village for the library project. And we'll do that analysis, and we'll get that back. So
Okay.
it'll be hopefully we'll get it back. It'll be a quick turnaround, 2 weeks, but I think we'll make it happen.
Okay. Sound good, everybody? Okay. All right.
We appreciate the thoughtful discussion, the feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your help.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so do we need a break? It's 6:30. Should we take a 5-minute break? All right, let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
I did, I wasn't.
Them up after we do the
What about HIPAA laws there?
public, I'm sorry, the public comment. So we'll go to 4C, which is public comment. This part of the agenda allows members of the public to provide information to the village board, including items both on and off the agenda. So is there anybody in the audience that would like to address us? Come on up. Just tell us your name and your address, please.
Sure. My name's Jennifer Ben Rafa, 632 Farwell Drive. I didn't plan to speak, so excuse me while I try to collect my thoughts. I tried to type some notes here. So I have 3 kids. They're 4, 6, and 10. And I feel like my family, it's kind of the family that's like exactly the family that's going to be using this library, right? With the young kids and more than other parts of the community. I wasn't really involved too much with the library come up to this point, but I did try to follow, reading some agenda notes and things. And I think one of the most disturbing things for me was when it was moved out to the outskirts of town, leaving it not accessible to quite a bit of our village. And I think the biggest thing about that was that, it was too expensive to build it in that location, so we have to move it out of town. well, now it's too expensive out of town, but we're making all of these concessions to make it a building that nobody is gonna be happy with, right? Like, this isn't what the village asked for in the first place. When we went through all of these library meetings, we had all of these things that they had listed there that were all, so what the community wanted in a library. We need these community spaces, and here we are talking about cutting all of that out. That was the big push for it, right? Now we're also cutting materials, and this current library, I'm old, but I'm not that old, and I grew up here, and I remember when the senior center was the library. I remember when this library was built. It's 25 years old? I'm just guessing here by memory, but are we gonna build a new $10, $15 million library every 25 years? I can hear from all of you that you don't wanna do that. So why are we making all of these concessions? Just to push through a library. I don't know if this is possible, but why are we pushing this now that we know that the budget is the cost is 50% more than we had wanted in the first place? Like, why do we need to build a $10 million, $15 million library that isn't what we want? Why are we pushing it? Why can't we pause and wait for building costs to come down? I can tell you, my husband works in building trade, and he is on point, 100%. If my husband doesn't want to do your tile job, he's going to bid it really high because he doesn't want to do it. And some people are going to pay for it, right? Because they still want their tile job done, right? And every other tile guy is probably bidding them just as high because they don't want to do it either. And he's right with all of the builders. Everything he said was right. And also, my husband has not had a raise, so on point on that one. Costs go up, but they don't go to the workers. And my other point, my last point on the library. So we need, that last section was $900-something thousand. We should take advantage of high property values at this point. The real estate market is still pretty crazy, right? Why don't we sell the Main Street property to a commercial builder and get our money back from that, so that we have this money to do the geothermal and the solar panels and all of that? Why not take advantage of that now? There's absolutely no reason to keep that empty space in a place that's not. If it wasn't good enough for the library, why is it good enough for something else for the village? And we don't really have something planned to go there, right? We have all of these other spaces for all of the other projects that, we have a space to put the senior center. We're moving the village hall. I haven't paid attention to know what the plan is for this old building. But we have all of these places now. Why are we holding on to a place that we could be selling, making our money back just by selling it, but then getting it on the tax roll and actually getting some continuous funding from it? But I appreciated all of your comments. I wanted to jump in so mad with so many more questions while you guys were talking, but thank you for letting me just talk on the fly like this too. But I would much rather wait with kids that are in the age that need the library right now. I would rather wait for a better library than shove through something like this that we may need to replace, or will be like the public safety building that we're constantly throwing more money at it to keep repairing it, keep updating it, replacing roofs, whatever it is, just because we needed to save some money on the front end here. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so is everybody okay if we move 9D, which is Matt's, move it up so he can take care of himself? All right, Matt?
Thank you, that would
Yeah.
be much appreciated. Who's controlling the power?
I've got it here.
Okay.
Yeah, hang on. I think we can
That's
do
the
that.
right page, yeah.
Here you go.
Thank you. Oh.
You want your little pointer, just click forward and backward.
All right, I can manage that. So the assignment I was given, as I understand it, is to discuss how the board might address affordable housing and sustainability issues differently in the TIF policy that has been adopted. And so that's what I'm going to try and do tonight. First, I want to just talk about what I mean when I'm talking about affordable housing. It's not necessarily just housing that, you know, I could afford, but it's housing that that we as lawyers run into as affordable housing projects that are subject to what this list describes. You know, these are properties where the property is subject to income-based occupancy restrictions, annual income qualification requirements, rent restrictions, and compliance monitoring. And these agreements that are negotiated that include these elements are typically in place for 30 years. So that, for example, is what the Lake Stone Newton property development is going to involve. That's the agreement, that it will meet these requirements. So there are other kinds of ways of talking about affordable housing. You know, we have Habitat for Humanity has been here and talked about what they're doing and trying to build, you know, more affordable homes that people can buy. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about essentially multifamily housing developments, rental properties that are really specifically designed to be affordable from a legal standpoint and from an enforceability standpoint, to meet certain to be targeted to serve people who are living at certain income levels. Okay. Okay. So the funding sources and the regulatory sources that we see on these projects, basically the biggies are tax credits. Tax credits are based in federal tax law, and they're administered by WIDA. And the way tax credits work is a certain level or amount of tax credit funding is made available by the federal government, and then are awarded on a competitive process each year. And those tax credits are sold to investors, excuse me, who then use them to offset their tax liability. And that's essentially a source of cash that can be used to help fund these projects. Not only is the tax credit process a competitive process, it's complicated. And as I understand it, as a result of changes in tax laws under the Trump administration, the tax credits are less valuable because of the tax cuts. So it's harder to generate revenue from tax credits to pay for projects because they're not as valuable as they used to be. So that's the biggest source of actual dollars that I see available to fund these kinds of projects. The second source of funding that I see is village tax incremental financing. Typically, the TIF component is a piece of the financial puzzle, but not the biggest piece. It's a piece, and it tends to help the scoring for the WIDA financing. If the community is contributing some TIF money, that helps the project score somewhat better in the WIDA process. And then, in addition to those two sources, the rest of the funding is private, either equity investment by the developer or bank financing. The tax credit and the TIF component of the funding then is what is there to essentially subsidize the gap that's generated by virtue of the rent restrictions that apply to the project going forward. Because the rent is going to be, from a regulatory standpoint, kept at a lower level, the project isn't as profitable, and so the tax credits and the TIF funding are designed to make the project profitable. So the developer says, yes, I'm ready to go forward with this project because I can earn a rate of return on it that makes me willing to put some of my own dollars into it and allows the bank to invest or to loan to the project. So those are the funding sources, and then that has a big impact on kind of how the project is structured. So if it's a tax credit project, to a large extent, WIDA is going to drive the process in terms of defining what the unit mix needs to be, what the, how a qualifying tenant is defined, how the rent restrictions have to work. That will be largely dictated by the federal tax law and by WIDA, if it's just a tax credit project. If there are no tax credits involved, and it's just village TIF funding, and I've done a couple of those, then the village has more flexibility to negotiate on those kinds of things than if it's a WIDA-driven project. And I have to apologize for the water. I have a toothache, and so cold water is the only thing that settles it down right now. I'm going tomorrow to get it fixed. So next, occupancy restrictions. What does that mean? This is what the Lakestone project says. This is how it's addressed in the Lakestone project. Qualifying tenants are defined as persons or families not exceeding 80% of Dane County median income for any individual unit, but the project as a whole has to average 60%. Now, not all projects are structured that way. I've seen other projects with different requirements, but this is not an unusual structure. It is a low-income housing tax credit financed project with TIF support that does meet the federal tax law requirements, and this is one way that I've seen it structured. What does the income certification look like? Prior to occupancy, and then each year thereafter, there's a requirement that the landlord, the owner, obtain and maintain documentation of tenant income from the tenants. We also need to build into these agreements then mechanisms to deal with a situation in which a tenant's income grows, and then once it gets to a certain level, what do you do? In some cases, that means the lease can't be renewed and the tenant needs to find a new place to live. I've had mixed projects where it's a mix of market rate and affordable units, where we've been able to structure the agreement to say that if the tenant's income exceeds the threshold by a certain amount, then that unit can just be converted to a market rate unit, and the landlord needs to make the next available market rate unit, needs to convert that to an affordable unit. Just giving you a level, kind of a sense of the level of the nitty-gritty that you get into with these, on those kinds of issues. Rent restrictions, what does that look like? So this is the kind of language that we see in these agreements, and I didn't put everything in just because it's mind-numbing, but this gives you, a pretty good flavor for it. So this is the Lakestone Lura defines gross, it says the gross rent for affordable units shall not exceed 30% of the imputed income limitation applicable to such unit as adjusted for family size and as published by HUD, provided the imputed income limitation is defined in the Internal Revenue Code shall apply to all affordable units. One of the things this means, you need like a team of lawyers to figure out what this means. It's pretty complicated stuff, actually, to get into the tax code and really understand how do you define gross income. It goes on here, I've included some additional language. Gross rent means the rental charge for an affordable unit, including any utility allowance. Gross rent does not include, and then there's a long list of things. And this is coming out of the tax law, basically, this definition of gross rent. So if you're a landlord and you're administering this project, you have to understand, what all of this means and how it needs to be interpreted and applied by you as you are administering your project. Or if you're a compliance monitoring agency, whether that be WIDA. Oh, speaking of compliance monitoring, what does that involve? So it typically involves a periodic inspection of the books and records of the business, requesting that they submit certifications and other documentation to demonstrate that the project is in compliance. In many cases, there are also fees that are paid so to help offset the cost of compliance monitoring. In projects where WIDA is funding tax credits. What I've done is just allowed WIDA to do the compliance monitoring because they're gonna do it anyway, and the village can just piggyback on that in a sense. If WIDA's not involved, then you have to think about how are we gonna do that? What are some of the challenges with these projects? So first, the developer needs the expertise and the personnel needed to navigate both the tax credit process, figuring out how to apply for and obtain tax credits, and then assuming they're fortunate enough to get a project built, they have to be able to manage that project. What I have seen is, there are some developers who, you know, this is their business and they've built a business around this and they have the expertise. Lakestone, this is a new thing for them. I think the Newton project was the first one they've done. They're trying to make this part of their business portfolio. But because it was the first one they did, I think they ran into some challenges that I think Elise knows more about than I do. So it was tough for them, I think, but they got through it, and now they've got one under their belt, and presumably the next one will be easier for them. I've had a few other projects. I've had projects in another community with two developers who are not affordable housing developers, but they were put in a position where they needed to make some units happen. And they ended up contracting with Stonehouse Development. That's their business model, is affordable housing, and they contracted with Stonehouse to do their income verification and compliance related work. So it's possible for a developer who doesn't know how to do this to find a way to do it, but you know, it certainly adds complexity and cost to the project that wouldn't be there for a market rate developer who has no experience with it. So that's challenge number one. Challenge two, unless the village can ride WIDA's coattails, the village would need to have in-house the expertise and the personnel necessary to engage in the compliance monitoring process. We'd have to at least think about how we're gonna do that. Who's gonna do that? Next, economies of scale, I think, is a challenge. If a project contains only a couple of units, for example, then affordable units, then the cost of administering that on a per unit basis is obviously much higher than, say, the Lakestone project, where there are a lot of affordable units where the administrative costs can be spread over the whole facility. So just something I've noticed. Political challenges are another challenge with projects like this. You know, you can see some challenges with even market rate multifamily projects. So if you imagine you've got a market rate project and now it's an affordable project, it just adds potential challenge locally to, you know, the political dynamic. So it's another challenge with these kinds of projects. So before we switch over to discussing sustainability, would anyone like to talk more about, that's all I have on affordable housing. Would anyone like to talk more about that? Or have any questions?
Anybody?
Well, I had proposed changes to the policy in relationship to affordable housing, but I can wait till we get to that
Okay.
portion if you'd like.
Yep, because I'll get to that at the end.
Yeah.
Could I suggest to the board, I know the splash pad people are here, and they have an item on the agenda that's probably really brief, and they would probably appreciate if that came up quickly. And I don't know how long more Matt is.
Oh, I
going,
can hang it. I got my water.
So, just a suggestion, if that's,
Without objection.
All right.
I'm good with that.
So that is 7D, right, Martin? It's a resolution in support of the
7D, huh?
yes.
7D.
Well, we would have gotten to that by 1 o'clock.
Yeah. All right, so let's take 7D. Let's take that off. Resolution number 2222, resolution in support of the Oregon Splash Pad project. Staff's recommendation is motion to approve as presented.
Move to approve as presented.
Okay?
Second.
Second by Carleen. Any discussion? All right, see none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Done.
Thank you for waiting.
All right, Matt.
All right, any questions about just the discussion so far on affordable housing? Okay. Next, sustainability. So when I started to look at this, one of the things that I recognize is I don't really have a clear definition of sustainability that I'm working with. Things that I've seen discussed here and elsewhere include solar power and electric vehicle charging stations. One thing I thought I would mention is that some sustainability issues might be best addressed through just generally applicable ordinances rather than through like TIF. So you guys have already addressed parking here. That's, I think, a sustainability related issue. Density objectives are things that can be addressed through both zoning and planning related processes. Water quality and quality issues can be addressed through stormwater management regulations. I will say, I put at the bottom, there are some limitations on local authority that I know we bump into at times when we're dealing with some of these issues. So, for example, there are limits that we run into with respect to stormwater management. The state has tied our hands to some extent on water quality issues primarily, I think. There's some things that, we can go to certain limits and then we can't really go beyond that.
Correct.
Building codes, another area where the state has tied our hands. We are legally bound to follow state building code requirements. We can't impose more stringent requirements on people in terms of building homes or commercial structures because the state has essentially preempted our authority in those areas. So, so there are some limits on what we can do through those kinds of codes. And so, yes, when the village is putting dollars into a project, that does open the door to discussion of things that we couldn't otherwise require. But I don't have a comprehensive list of what those things might be at this point. So that's all I really have on sustainability. So with that discussion in mind, we did include in the packet tonight some adjustments to the policy for your consideration. So the first, with respect to the policy itself, we amended one of the goals in the policy, which already, it previously said that as a goal it asked whether the proposed tax increment district or project would increase the availability of affordable housing. And the suggested revision is to change that to say whether the proposed tax increment district or project would increase the availability of a range of workforce housing options, including affordable housing. And I also note that the TIF policy does not define affordable housing, so that is left up to the board on a case-by-case basis to define within the context of a specific project. The next goal that we added to the policy is whether the proposed tax increment district or project would include sustainability measures that will promote a healthy environment and reduce the impact of climate change. At least that's how I have it drafted in what I have here. I'm not, I think an earlier version of that had slightly different language. I think, we said reduce the impact of climate change. I've changed that in the, so I also made some tweaks to the application. And there I said, describe whether the project would include sustainability measures that will promote a healthy environment, including measures to reduce climate change impacts. Oh, it's the same language. Okay, reduce climate change impacts. Sorry, I thought I saw something different today. So, yes, these tweaks were made to the policy, and then they were built into the application as well, with the idea that in the application now, there are two specific questions added that the developer is being asked to respond to. One says, for a project that contains housing, describe whether the project would increase the availability of a range of workforce housing options, including affordable housing. If the project will not increase the availability of affordable housing, explain why it does not, and explain whether the project could include affordable housing if the village provides additional TIF support. And then the next new question in the application asks, describe whether the project would include sustainability measures that will promote a healthy environment, including measures to reduce climate change impacts. Now, it's probably obvious to everyone at this point that these changes are not designed to impose mandatory obligations. They're not set up to say every project has to have X, Y, or Z. Instead, they're designed to raise the question and ask the developer, explain whether you're doing something on these issues, and if so, what, and if not, help us understand why not, or whether more could be done if more funding is made available. And I guess that's the last point I'll make, is that one of the things that I've learned on these kinds of projects is that really the limiting factor tends to be the funding that's available. And so if the village wants to incorporate these things in TIF projects, I think the village has the opportunity to do it so long as the funds are there. But that's the limiting factor. There was, on a recent project that we discussed, that you all took a vote on, there was some additional money left on the table for the village in the TIF to use for other, I think 30%, to use for other projects that you could have said, well, let's use it on this project to pay for something that addresses, say, sustainability issues or affordability issues. You could raise that discussion. There was some money available for that, and there would be in other projects in the future as well. But the policy that you have before you tonight doesn't make it mandatory. It just is designed to create the opportunity for the board to have that discussion with the developer and amongst one another, and then see where that goes. So that's all I have.
Jenna, I don't know, I was waiting, and then Phil? Go ahead, Jen.
So, to your comment about affordable housing, what does that mean? I would propose that we would define it in the TIF policy in the application to either say tax subsidized or federally subsidized affordable housing, since that is, in my understanding of when we talk about it, what we're talking about, Section 8, Section 42, et cetera. So I would propose that we would change the language to.
You want to actually define affordable housing?
Yeah.
What about workforce housing? Do you see those as the same thing?
Yeah, so workforce housing, as I understand it, was a attempt to remarket affordable housing because that term was unpalatable.
I guess I would just add that I think like the Lakestone project would not, I don't believe is one of those sections of housing that you've mentioned.
That's
so,
correct,
yeah.
but it is a federally subsidized project, which is why I use the term federally subsidized
Okay.
affordable housing instead of defining the actual section of the tax code, because then it would cover both currently defined subsidized and then any future projects that might come from.
Well,
federal.
so your suggestion is that the policy define affordable housing as a project that receives either village or federal financial support through either tax credits or TIF funding?
I didn't specify village, I only specified federal.
State
So
or federal.
you would define affordable housing as housing that receives financial support through federal tax credits.
Which would, yeah, generally be administered through WIDA.
And that would be if it doesn't fit that definition, then it wouldn't be viewed as affordable housing within at least the TIF policy.
Yeah, so again, I'm trying to align how we colloquially speak about affordable housing with what the policy is worded as. So I think my interpretation of when we're talking about affordable housing is we're generally talking about either naturally occurring, which wouldn't necessarily be asking for TIF money, or a new development, which would be, again, if it's going to fall under affordable housing, it's generally subsidized through federal tax dollars.
So what I'm just taking that as a comment, a suggestion, or
Yeah,
a
it's
request.
just a suggestion.
And then
Yeah.
why don't we see
For
what else there is,
discussion.
and then I guess what I would ask is the board, maybe as a group, tell me what changes you'd like to see, and I'll make some notes.
Would you like, I just have one
Yeah.
other, or two other things. I also was looking in through the policy, and instead of saying, I guess I would like to change language to be a little less passive, and so instead of describing whether the project is affordable or whether it has sustainability features to just ask how it is an affordable project, or how it is being built sustainably,
What if it's not affordable? What if it's a market rate project?
then they would need to say that.
Don't they say that the way I've said it?
They can. I think the language, I'm just proposing a language change, again,
That
to,
assumes that it is an affordable project.
that is asking them to say, speak.
How it is an affordable.
Rather
Yeah,
than
or to say it is not.
So rather than a yes, no
Oh,
answer,
well,
it's
but in the
more
application-
describe.
Instead of saying, define whether it is, to say, yes, it is, or no,
Well,
it is
that's the
not.
policy. The application says, describe whether the project would increase the availability of a range of workforce housing options. If the project will not increase the availability, explain why it does not.
Right, so I was just proposing that we say,
Describe
to
how
describe
it will
how the
increase.
project will increase the availability of a range of workforce housing options, or how.
Duly noted.
Just a suggestion, we don't have to adopt it, but I want to throw it out there. Same with the sustainability concept, to change that verbiage to ask how it will do this, if that's our priority, versus whether it will. And then to include a list of, I was hoping maybe the sustainability committee could include a list of initiatives that we would look for when we're asking
Yeah.
for sustainability. To your point about defining what that means, maybe that's something the sustainability committee could come up with.
Yep, that would be
Okay.
helpful, to have a clear sense of what kinds of things you're looking for.
Yeah, those were my comments.
All right, Phil, you're up.
Well, first I wanted to clarify, and I like your ideas on the first part of your ideas. I'm not sure about the second, but to be blunt. But is the language that you're proposing, Matt, is that covering all scenarios for to finance affordable housing?
Well, the language I'm proposing in both the TIF policy and the application is not assuming
Right.
that the project is an affordable housing project
Yeah.
as I'm defining.
Right.
It could be a market rate project. In fact, most of the projects the village has done have been market rate projects.
Right.
So, I'm saying, I'm not making assumptions in the application or in the policy about what it is. I'm saying, tell us what it is. And if it's a housing project and you're not increasing the availability of affordable housing,
Right.
explain why not.
Okay. And then the first part of what Jenna was suggesting was some language about, maybe you could help me out. You said you were defining the financing mechanisms. And I'm asking if what she's suggesting is covering all possible financing mechanisms.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I do, if you'd like. It
Yeah.
is not, because there are a lot of ways to make housing more affordable. That can be through TIF projects, that can be through federally subsidized projects, that can be through, if the village were to partner with a developer and say, do all the streets and all the infrastructure, and then the developer just does the houses. Like, there's a lot of ways to do it. When I think about what the parameters of a TIF district, how we currently use them, and and I think about the potential developments in those districts, I think, and then how we've talked about it historically, that's what leads me to the suggestion that we define it as a federally subsidized project. But we don't have to, because it isn't the only way that it happens, but that's, to my mind, where we've been going with this, so.
I guess, I'd refer that back to Matt again and say, I'd like to,
Well,
not necessarily on the spot here, but I'd like to make sure that what language we're proposing is not, we're not painting ourselves into a corner, is what I'm saying.
as the policy's drafted, even if you define affordable housing narrowly, that doesn't foreclose you from proceeding with the project. It just means that the developer now, who's answering the question in the application, if the question is, are you providing affordable housing or making it more available? If you define affordable housing in a certain way, the developer might have to say, no, I'm not, even though the developer might be doing something that you all would view as addressing the issue in some way, even though it's not addressing it in that specific way.
Right.
So, That's the practical consequence of, it doesn't mean that you are now foreclosed from, carrying forward with the discussion with the developer. It just means that you've set up a narrow definition of affordable housing that will then influence at least that part of the discussion in some way.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, Carleen and Mike?
Yeah, so I was listening to all of those things, and I was the person who threw this out to the guy after the fact, so I think the goals, I really like the way you stated the goals as, and expanded them. And I guess I would prefer to not be narrow in our definition of how we define affordable housing, because there are other ways that it can happen. So I'm comfortable with the way you've worded it, especially after your presentation about the different ways that affordable housing can happen. I'm just looking at this part of the application itself and thinking about how this can be termed for a project that contains housing, describe whether the project would increase. I'm really comfortable with this language that you put in here, because they do have to explain why they're not doing it if they're not doing it. And okay, so they're not, and then they explain why not, and we can make a determination from that. But you're right, it's a lot more complicated than just saying, put 2 or 3 units in there. So thank you for this work.
All right. Mike?
Must be my night to agree with people. I got to go along with Carleen here. I like it being more general, because both on the housing thing and the sustainability thing, because people may come up with ideas and ways of financing or ways of making something sustainable that I haven't thought of. They can write it out. I like the fact that you're calling it out in the questionnaire. It really forces them to at least address it, and the village board at that point can make, a decision as to how much we agree or disagree with what's in there. But I like your approach and the wording. I wouldn't change a thing.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Derek?
Yeah, just pretty much in agreement here as far as the wording and how you have this done. I think it's gonna allow us to more effectively filter through the TIF applications, and I'd actually make the motion to approve as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Yeah, Amanda?
Well, I have to say, I'm not against having some sort of definition of affordability, but maybe it isn't looking at sources of funding, because Matt has provided this nice definition of qualifying tenants. And, any housing where you have to qualify tenants based on income would be affordable housing. I mean, something simple that still, allows for all kinds of ways to make it affordable, but that you're talking specifically about tenants having to qualify based on income.
Well, that would be certainly the kind of approach to affordable housing we'd be dealing with if we were funding a project in exchange for commitment to rent-restricted, income qualification type housing. Let me just Elise, are you gonna be doing your little presentation later on this?
I didn't
Or
know
not?
where that was fitting
Where that was
into
gonna
your
fit in?
spiel, but I'm ready.
It'll come after me,
No,
but I'll just give
that-
you an
that-
She's
She's got a 2-hour presentation.
Elise
she'll be
might,
doing here in a
she
little bit.
might.
Matt,
add
that's
some-
scheduled for 2 a.m.
Yeah, she might have a little more to add to this, but let me give you an example of one of the things that I've learned. Amanda, weren't you on that trip we took to Sun Prairie to see
Yeah.
the Smiths Crossing
Mhm.
development? So that's not an affordable housing development as I defined it here, but one of the things we learned about it is that it was an example of a development where the city collaborated with the developer to modify the standards that would otherwise have applied in terms of infrastructure build-out, lot size, and so on, so that they were able to bring the cost per home down so that they would be less expensive homes. Now, that developer is not legally restricted in terms of what they can sell the homes for, but my understanding is that that was the idea. The concept was, how can we build homes at a lower cost that would then allow us to sell homes at a lower cost? That's just another way to look at affordability. It's different from this way, but in my mind, it shouldn't be taken off the table. Because the other thing we learned on that particular field trip was that it's good to provide a range of housing options and have different price points available, not everything at one price point or what have you. And so for me, I personally have struggled with the concept of trying to define affordable housing as one thing, because I think it's a much bigger concept. And since price also is like really related to supply, I mean, anything that increases supply should theoretically at some point have an impact on price. So even building more market rate apartments is something that addresses the need for more housing. Now, not in the same regulated, rent restricted way that we're talking about here, where if the village is saying we're gonna put money into this, we want to know that we're getting some rent restricted units that will truly be affordable for people at this income level. And I get it, there's a need for that. But it's not the only thing we have a need for, in my mind.
Okay. Yeah,
I
Jennifer.
just, I don't, the project that you mentioned in Sun Prairie, I don't believe that one had TIF, did it?
I doubt it, because
I don't
it
think
was
so.
basically a single-family residential subdivision.
So that's kind of what I was getting at as far as how we use TIF policy in our TIDs, is the fact that, you know, we're not doing like some other communities where we're saying, okay, here's a cornfield, we want it redeveloped, so we're gonna make it a TIF district so that we can provide TIF to have it developed in this. Most of, well, all of our, I believe, our current TIDs are in the village, and it's infill, it's redevelopment. So that's when I'm talking about how we're using the TIF policy and marrying it with what we've been talking about with affordable housing. You're right, that's a great opportunity in a way that we make affordable housing, and it kind of sounds like that Viridian development near the Mary Hill neighborhood is going to be doing something similar, right?
I'd like to, yep.
Right,
Yep.
but
Very much so.
that's also not in a TID asking for TIF. So that's kind of where I was coming from, is when you look at, like, look at TID 5, that's the one I'm most familiar with, and where it goes, look at the areas of that, it's very downtown, it follows Main Street. What could potentially go in there? What would a developer bring forward as a project? So that's why I was kind of marrying the federally subsidized and TIF or TID district, or TIF funding policy. So that was kind of where I was going.
And I understand what you're saying. I would say, though, that there are residential developments that include single-family homes that are TIF supported. So,
Yeah.
for example, Stoughton, Kettle Park West, where the Walmart is,
Yeah.
they're now moving into the residential phase of that development. And there has been TIF support both at the commercial phase and now at the residential phase to facilitate that project. Now, again, those single-family homes are not going to be regulated in the way that we've been talking about tonight. But certainly one of the city's objectives there is to try and bring additional housing onto the market at a price point that is better than what it would otherwise be. So TIF can be a player in those kinds of projects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was, like I said, I was just looking at how we've historically used it, how we
Yep.
have our TID districts currently, and looking forward.
Elise,
I
yeah.
was just gonna add that we have talked about with the Southeast Business Park, Southeast expansion, creating a TIF district, a mixed-use TIF district, which would be all new development largely out there. And that could support residential development at a scale similar to what you saw in Sun Prairie, where it's a new neighborhood and we're trying to direct the specific mix of housing and types of units that are being built. So this is something, of course, we can always come back and revise if we don't find that we're getting the level of detail from developers that we want to see about what are you really truly doing to add to the workforce or the housing options in the village. And if we need to add more specifics, then we could do that. But I really see this as this checklist. We talked about this when Martin and Matt and I met of who's doing the work. Are we going to put this kind of on the developer? And I don't know if we're going to discuss this tonight, but is the responsibility on the developer to really go through and answer all these questions? And how much of it is also on staff to verify the answers and kind of, essentially give like a scorecard to the village board and say, we've got our, 7-8 goals. They're meeting 5 of them. Here's why, we're kind of fuzzy on this one. And, maybe it's not a residential type project. So the affordability question's not really going to be relevant for a project like Pisces where they're not providing housing. So it's just one of many goals, and most projects aren't going to meet all of them, but it just provides us a starting point to review and hopefully are making sure we are using to meet the goals of the village.
Okay, yeah, Amanda.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that all makes sense to me, I guess. I like that I'm okay with the wording on the affordable housing also for the application, because it's whether or not you do, and we need both kinds, frankly. We need market rate housing and affordable housing, so asking it in that way makes sense. But I do agree with Jenna in making the sustainability portion more direct, because I don't think as a planet we can afford to not include sustainability in projects going forward. I want to really make it clear to developers that you better be thinking about this. Like, this is important for everybody. So I feel like stronger language in that is really important.
And to that end, I like the comment about the Sustainability Committee, maybe developing some recommendations that could be then built into this, number one. Number two, I think it's also worth thinking about what can best be addressed through the TIF policy and what could be best addressed through other ordinance changes. I know Madison has adopted, and the Village of Short Hills is looking at adopting an ordinance that requires a certain number of electric vehicle charging stations in certain types of new developments. So that's just a general ordinance that you could adopt, and then that just becomes part of their project pro forma. You might end up paying for it with TIF money anyway, because they may still come and ask for TIF money, and that's one of their costs. But it's a different way of getting at it. So I think it would be helpful to have a better understanding of what are the sustainability measures you'd like to see, and then what are the strategies available to achieve them. What are the best strategies available to achieve them?
Okay, yeah, Elise.
Yeah, just to add, we use the City of Middleton's TIF policy as a guide for some of this language, and they did qualify the sustainability measure that it's our expectation you're going to use LED lighting and high efficiency appliances. That's pretty much standard in any new construction. Any new fridge you're going to go out and buy now is going to be better than a 20-year-old fridge. So I like that it kind of had that baseline of, we know you're going to do that, but here's some ideas about green roofs, geothermal, PV, charging stations. There was a list of a couple things, and then and others, other things that folks might think about that we hadn't considered. So that was a good list to go off of
Okay.
as a starting point.
All right, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of doing it through ordinance, because then it doesn't just apply to TIF
Right,
things.
it
It
affects a lot
applies to
more
everything, and I
projects.
think that that's a broader way to get at what you're talking about.
All right, so on the table, we do have a motion and a second to approve Matt's language changes. Okay, does everybody, all right? And a motion and a second, okay? Any other discussion before we vote?
Well, with the idea that we could modify it if the Sustainability Committee comes up with
Yeah.
something, so
Yeah,
we
but
can
we're
pass this
accepting what he
tonight to have.
has.
Always
Okay.
subject to change, but this will
Yeah.
be the policy as of tonight, if it's
Okay.
approved.
Yeah,
Till next week.
Till
next week.
Okay.
till 3 a.m. Yeah, okay. All right, We got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
So Lisa, you gonna
Two
do-
down.
You gonna do one? or
Ooh.
you're not? You don't need to, but if you are, I wanna watch it. That's
I guess just a quick piggyback on, changes we can make to the ordinance, just a reminder, we had the, joint session with the planning commission back in February. I think, Martin was presenting on my behalf, but we are planning some text amendments for updating the definition of family, allowing more mixed-use development by right in certain districts, but not having to go through the conditional use permit process, a variety of other things I won't go through tonight, but just to know that we are working on some of those changes, both for our comprehensive plan and then our zoning code, that would affect all projects and not just TIF projects, so I think that's another opportunity to really move the needle on some of these issues, so that's coming whenever I have time.
All right. All right, we ready? We're back to 5A. Upcoming meetings and events, that was in our packet, for you to get stuff on your calendar.
I have one to add to that.
All right, yeah.
The DEI committee will meet on July 7th and July, some of the July meetings are in there.
All right, so July 7th. Okay. Great. Okay, thank you, Carlene. All right, 6, report of village officers. 6A, village administrative report that was in our packet from Martin. 6B, village department head, staff, or consultant comments. Do we have anything? Anybody? Okay. 6C is village board comments. Anybody? Okay, we'll go to 7. Communication, miscellaneous business, items are for discussion. Possible action, we'll go to A, which is approval of the vouchers in the amount of $382,817.55. If we can get a motion in a second, we'll get it on the table. Amanda? And Carlene? All right. Questions for staff? Anybody on the vouchers? See, none tonight. All right.
Somewhere Jerry is going,
I
no!
know. Wait, I'm on my way. All right, all in favor say aye. All right, I'm sorry.
Yep.
See, it's getting late already, so we need a voice vote on this one.
Peterson,
Yes.
Wunsch,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Philo,
Yes.
Glitch,
Yes.
Van Campen,
Yes.
and Beschen.
Yes.
Okay. 7B, meeting minutes for the April 13th, 2022 Oregon Public Library Board. Information only was in our packet. 7C is a resolution number 2221, resolution in support of democracy and nonpartisan election administration in the Village of Oregon. Carlene wanted to bring this one, and Carlene, you want to say anything? on this
Yes,
one?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't know how much folks are keeping up with what is happening with the Wisconsin Election Commission and the turnover there, the resignation recently of one of the Republican members who believes that our elections were held in a safe, secure manner and feels like the Wisconsin Election Commission is really under fire and there's not a new person appointed to replace him. There's a lot of moves on the part of the legislature to make oversight of elections very partisan. That's a really, really, really scary concept. It's moving us toward an autocratic society if we allow that to happen. We have a fabulous clerk and a staff here in the village who handle our elections beautifully. They've been audited. We know that they're good, and we need to make a statement to our state legislature that we really do believe that our elections are safe and secure, and we have confidence in the nonpartisan administration of elections. So that's what this is about. We're trying to get as many of these passed around the state as possible for that very reason, so that we are not looking at partisan oversight of elections.
All right. Well said, Carlene. So we'll take a motion in a second for this one. I'll take Amanda and Jenna. Any other discussion on this? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you, Carlene, for bringing that to our. All right, we did D already, so we'll go to 7E, which is the annual alcohol beverage license renewal applications for July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. Staff is recommending approval as presented.
Move to approve as presented.
Okay, Phil, thank you, and Amanda, second. Any discussion from anybody? We'll do the whole thing, the whole list at once. Okay? Seeing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Randy, can I say something real quick?
you may, absolutely.
I just want to say, this process takes quite a bit of time in our department, in the clerk's department. But I also wanted to, it takes a lot of time out of the police department as well as the fire department because they do a lot of checking. So I wanted to say thanks for that. So thanks for your work in doing that.
Okay.
As well as Joy. She did the majority of it.
Great.
Yep, you passed
Okay.
it. Yep.
All right. All right, we can go to 7F, which is a memorandum of agreement with the State of Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection for weights and measures services at an annual amount of $1,200. Staff is recommending approval. I assume, I don't know, this is just we do this every year, annual
This is an
fee.
annual thing, yep. And it's
Okay.
actually, the fee is actually decreasing. It's currently
Okay.
$2,000 and
Okay.
it's going, so for 2023, it's gonna go down to $1,200.
Deal. All right. All right, can we get a motion in a second? I see Amanda and Carleen. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. 7G is 2-year lease extension with the United States Postal Service for the use of 252 Brook Street. Jeff always gets to handle this for us. Jeff, do you want to say anything? You got
No,
some.
the main focus of this is we are convinced that in 2 years, we will be needing that site. And so we really worked to negotiate with them to let them know that, 2 years ago we said this, and then now 2 years later, we're saying we definitely need to make sure you're out by that time. And so you'll see that there's just been some things added that really get serious for them should they stay beyond the 2-year period. And also, we increased the rent because, quite honestly, the building is getting more and more expensive to maintain.
Okay,
So,
all right.
but they've been good to work with. And I've been told they're working internally for a new site in the Village of Oregon.
Okay.
We can't really talk about right now, but that, we want them to stay.
All right. All right, can we get a motion, a second on this? Amanda and Mike, any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Good.
Thank you.
Okay. H is grant applications for the bipartisan infrastructure law, including the carbon reduction program for electric vehicles, surface transportation program, urban program for East Lincoln Street reconstruction, surface transportation program, local program for Dewey Street reconstruction, and supplemental transportation alternative program for bike and pedestrian transportation study. Lauren, this is you?
This is Lauren.
Okay.
You guys thought you'd get away without any of my memos,
Mhm.
and yet here I am. This is a long one, and it's got a lot of numbers and information in it, so I'm happy to answer any questions. I figure most of it is probably here, and it has been a long meeting already, so if folks do have questions, though, please let me know.
So Lauren, I'll just say, I love when we apply for grants. It's free money, and so thank you. I know I sent you an email, and I know other staff too helped you with these, so.
Yes.
So when will we find out on these, Lauren?
That's an excellent question. The first grant, the CRP grant, that's supposed to be coming out with information this month. The next, the STP grants, they're saying June to July they'll announce. And then the TAP supplemental, there is no information, even within the departments running this. So
Okay.
you'll find that a lot of these are a little bit up in the air. The Wisconsin Department of Transportation was kind of given all this money by the federal government and told you have to go out, you have to get solicitations for this. And so they're scrambling in a sense, as were we, as we were putting these applications together. So this will run a whole lot more smoothly next year through the end of the BIL cycle. But this year, I think the impression I've gotten is they'll get out the information when they get it out.
Okay, all right. So the staff recommendation is a motion to support the grant applications for these. If we can get a motion in a second. Jenna, Mike, any other discussion? All
Just-
right.
nice.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mike and Amanda.
Go ahead. It doesn't-
I just wanted to thank you for putting these out here. I really like to see that the Public Works is dipping its toes into electric vehicles and things, so.
That's what I was gonna say. Yay.
This definitely
Yeah.
isn't me. This is, and I do just want to put this out here because I think it's important for the board to be aware. I came on board just at a fortuitous time as far as when BIL came out. So this is something that we'll be looking at least for the next 5 years. And so it's something that Jeff and I will be taking into account as we start budgeting for capital improvements in those 5 years. As I kind of said in the memo, these projects, especially these reconstruction projects, will involve a significant cash outlay by the village. These are not minor projects, but will move around the money that we were planning to spend to kind of accommodate them as they do come up. I also want to say that these are all surface transportation focused. So there are also funds that have been made available that are more clean water focused. Those will come through the DNR, but the DNR has said at this point, they're still putting their program together. Don't even try applying. So we'll see more projects that we can kind of put together on the reconstruction side that we might be able to focus more on sewer and water infrastructure down the line. So we'll have a whole second group of grants to look at when that does finally come out.
Okay. All right, so we do have a motion and a second to support the grant applications. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And then Lauren, I think this one, next one is yours too.
Yep.
Is I with state municipal agreement for state-led surface transportation program urban project providing grant funding in the amount of $206,240 for the South Burr Oak Avenue Improvement Project and related engineering proposal for design services from Town and Country Engineering in an amount not to exceed $25,000. Again, the staff recommendation, we did get this one, Lauren,
We
correct?
did, correct.
Recommendation is to affirm the approval of the grant and authorize proposal from Town and Country Engineering as presented. So Amanda's making a motion, and Carleen, any other discussion from anybody? Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, what's the cost and the funding source for the ramp improvements for ADA?
That's an excellent question. We are actually looking at the cost right now. We're going to go out with Speedway as well as Town and Country to take a look at these ramps. We have looked at doing it internally, and the assessment from our streets department was that it would be about 3 weeks full staff time for at least 2 staffers. So we'll take a look at what a contractor would charge us to do this work. We will wrap it into our mill and overlay budget for the year, so the funding is covered, and we're doing kind of budgeting around that work.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we got a motion and a second for approval. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lauren, very much. Thanks for waiting around for us.
Every meeting she comes to is a very long meeting. I'm
Yeah.
just noticing that.
All right, we're on to 7J, which is resolution number 2223, resolution to endorse an updated highway functional classification system map for the Village of Oregon. Staff is recommending approval. Do we need to say anything, Jeff, on
This
this?
is just a formality. Every once in a while, we have to update that, or else we don't have, the DOT updates it, and they give us the map for view based off of average daily traffic, and other things. So this is, we
Okay.
reviewed it, our engineers have reviewed it, and we're good with
Okay.
this.
All right, looking for a motion and a second. Amanda and Derek, any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. On to K, which is proposal for construction testing services with CGC Incorporated related to J.C. Park redevelopment project in an amount not to exceed $6,910. Staff is recommending approval. Jeff, is this yours
Nope,
too?
Yep. it's just
All
good.
right,
Unless there's any questions.
okay. Anybody? Any motion, how about a motion and a second? Amanda and Phil? Any discussion? You got some? No, you look like you're, all right. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
8 is reports of committees. Items are for discussion, possible action. A is Park Board. A1 is proposal for temporary ice hockey rink in or adjacent to Rustic Vineyard Park in nearby dry retention pond. Staff recommendation is to direct village attorney, engineers, and staff to provide advice on the request.
This came out, we had a discussion, and in my tenure here, we've had probably 2 or 3 requests of this over the time, or sometimes they're ball field, kind of pop-up ball fields and that type of stuff. This is a rink that was constructed out in a dry detention pond, which is fine in the winter, but then you concern sometimes in the spring when things start to melt and everything. So I think the thrust of it was, you know, obviously you can see they did an exceptionally nice job on this, and it was an incredible rink and a great neighborhood asset. But we really felt that maybe we should have Matt provide an opinion on it, as well as kind of what might liabilities incur, especially if it's in a area that is actually the primary focus is stormwater management. And so before we spent any efforts, time, resources, I think it's really coming to you to say, if this is something you feel that is something that should be evaluated, then we should move forward. If not, then it would pretty much say that we would not allow it unless they came with a different alternative.
Okay. So,
Is that right, Martin? Is that kind of sums it? That's kind
Jeff,
of
am I correct? There's more and more popping up? Is it, or would that
I
not be
wouldn't say
fair?
more and more. I mean, the gentleman that, there's a rink that's right down the street from Jenna there.
Yeah.
Came and asked that this go in the pond behind his house there, the dry detention pond, and at that time that was told he couldn't. So that's why they have it on the side yard.
Okay.
It's just something that's coming up
Yep.
occasionally. We've also had a few, we had someone build a baseball diamond in one of the dry detention ponds a few years ago.
Okay. So what we're,
Jen has a question.
oh, yeah, Jenna, go ahead.
This isn't the area of Rustic Vineyard Park where we have other playing fields though, correct? This is a separate, I'm trying to
This
visualize
is
the
at
park.
the
I
end of
apologize.
Mary Hill Drive, part of the original Jim Lease, you know, where it just dead ends there.
Yeah.
Behind those houses are dry detention ponds. And so there, it goes houses, dry detention ponds, and then that ball field and everything that is part of Vineyard Park.
Yeah,
So one thing that we've looked at is like, well, could you move it out of the detention pond or the dry pond and into the park? And then if that were the case, what type of liability would we face, you know, or what type of requirements might the village require, like a deposit or an agreement or something like that signed with the village?
okay. But,
Okay.
never mind, go ahead.
Yeah, Amanda, you have some?
Well, not so much a question. I just, you know, I like the initiative that, you know, people have in this community to want to make facilities like that and at their own expense, for a lot of it. And I like the idea of looking into it and getting an opinion from Matt, but not just for ice rinks. I would say let's do that for ball fields or any type of thing. Let's find out what our liability is and.
Right, exactly. This
Yeah,
doesn't, this
yeah.
would be more of an
I like it.
overarching type of thing, because we've had individuals ask us, can we place our beehives in public areas and harvest honey off of that? Some people like to recreationally mow large areas just because they really like to mow. So I think those are things that we really need to talk about, our public spaces and people operating in those public spaces and what type of things we should and shouldn't allow.
So Jeff, in this, we approved this, you'll look at things beyond just the ice rinks?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So we're looking for a motion to direct village attorney, engineers, staff to provide advice on the request. Mike
moved.
and Phil, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
A2 is proposal to place remaining properties adjacent to the future library and conservancy, and recommendation from Park Board is to delay action and consider decision as part of the 2023 comprehensive plan and park and open space updates. Staff is recommending to affirm the recommendation by the park board. Anybody want to make a motion and second, get it on the table, we
I
can
would move
discuss?
that.
Okay, Phil, and then I'll take Carleen. All right, discussion. Any discussion? Yeah, Carleen?
Thank you, Martin. First of all, I like the way you put things together in historical perspective so that we can just see how thinking on almost anything, but the last several on a piece of property in the village has evolved over time. I think it's a really good idea to put this as part of a larger comprehensive plan as we look at parks and just planning in general. I do, I'm just going to put it out there, I do like the idea of it being conservancy, and as I look at these things over time, it's like, oh, really? So that's just my comment, and thank you for the historical perspective.
Amanda?
Yeah, I'm with Carleen on this. I appreciate how it's put together. I also do think that land should be conservancy, and I want people watching to not freak out if we delay this, right? It's a delay. We're still talking about it, but I remain committed to that option at this time, so.
Okay. All right, so we got a motion and a second to affirm the recommendation of the park board. Okay? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. We're on to 9, unfinished business. Items are for discussion, possible action. 9A is review result of Village Hall 101 Alpine Parkway remodel project bid, awarding contract to Fox Arneson. Am I saying that, Jeff?
Yeah,
Right?
that is
Okay.
correct, yes.
In the amount of $1,261,000 and consider total project budget of $1.6 million. Staff is recommending motion to award the contract and approve total project of $1.6 million as presented. Jeff, do you want to,
Well, yeah.
or do you want to get it on the table first, or you want to do
Doesn't matter.
that? Let's get it on the table. Mike and then Carleen?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, this is exciting, obviously, and I think it's kind of, I hate to say this, but I like the library going ahead of us, because that seems like a really good deal. When we purchased this building and the One Community Bank offered us, we knew it was a good opportunity for us, but we also knew that we'd have to stick some capital into it. Honestly, our costs came in higher than what we thought they would be, and a very large percentage of our costs are going into finishing the boardroom, adding that equipment that's necessary. It'll be a very nice boardroom, and then creating that community space area that's gonna be a lot more accommodating for groups and events and that type of thing. And then secondly, we're working with the police department and everything in creating a safe space for our staff and having what we call our secure and non-secure area, which you've been upstairs is not very secure. And so I think these are all very important things. I think this is a 50-year plus easily investment in that building, and I think it will continue to provide us space for a long time. We're looking forward to it, and actually we're looking forward to an open house where we can welcome the public in to kind of see this great opportunity. So,
Okay.
and the other thing is we're asking that we finish off that garage area, which was an alternate under our contract. If you look into it, it turned out to be actually a very good deal to finish that off, and that's kind of why we included it as an alternate. We weren't sure if we'd get sky-high prices, but we will never be able to finish that off for what the price that they have today to offer.
Okay. All right, so we got a motion, a second on the table. Any other discussion? Yeah, Mike and then Amanda?
Yeah, what are the implications of pulling a sewer and water utility contribution? Does that raise rates or anything for people?
I guess we'll see. So right now, the water and sewer utilities have millions of dollars over their minimum recommended cash balances. The sewer utility in particular. So it's very easy to draw 160,000 from that, and it won't have an immediate impact to either of those utilities. I think as part of we're doing the utility rate studies this year, so we'll be able to see what that impact is. I think for water, we were already looking at pretty sporadic rate increases already over the
Yeah.
next 10 years,
Yeah.
pretty minimal ones.
We've not changed our rates in over 10 or 12 years, and so, but they were stepwise rates, not only to accommodate on the sewer side for the facilities plan, but the water side as well was anticipated.
Yep. Yeah, so in the sewer, it'll just take away from potential other projects that may occur in the future. And we'll just have to analyze that and see what that impact is. But as far as the short-term impact, again, I think the sewer utility is something like $3 million over its minimum, recommended cash balance. So we've accrued quite a large cash balance in both utilities.
Okay. Amanda, you're up.
Yeah, that garage space, that's unheated?
Unheated. Well, there'll be a little space heater out there, but it's not like a climate-controlled area, no.
Okay, is that okay for storing election equipment? You're not talking about the machines, you're talking
No,
about
I'm talking about
cones and
barricades
signage.
and stuff that
Okay,
we have to
okay.
move around. No. We actually have climate-controlled storage in the building, a nice, very large area downstairs planned for that,
Okay,
so.
thanks.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. Anybody else before we vote? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. 9B is proposal for Vanderwall and Associates for 249-267 North Main Street, site reuse opportunity. Scope of services in the amount of $15,400. Staff recommendation is motion to approve as presented. Anybody willing to do a motion in a second, get it on the table? All right, Phil and then Mike. All right, we got it on the table. Any discussion? Okay. Think pretty self-explanatory, I think, on this one, Martin? Yeah? Okay. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. 9C? Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
just have a quick question
Yeah.
in those two projects, we talked about, we're using dollars from the fund balance that's over, and when we're going to potentially discuss the rest of those dollars?
Yeah, so the 2021 audit will be presented at the next meeting. And we'll want to do a budget amendment to decide how those funds will be used, or if you want to use them at all. And so that would be a good opportunity to, if you have some ideas of how you want to use those funds, or if the board has some ideas, then that would be good direction at that time to give us to where you want to shift those things around.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. So we're on to 9C. Master Professional Services Agreement with Sievers to furnish engineering, architectural survey, and/or planning services, and task order for professional services for structural engineering consulting of public art installation at the corner of Janesville and Park Street in the amount of $2,000. I think, Jeff, you talked about this, and you actually got that right on the money. You said about 2,000, that's what we have in the
Someone must be
here.
watching our
Yeah,
meetings.
somebody's watching. All right, can we get a motion in a second? We get it on the table from Carleen. I need a second from somebody. Amanda? Okay, any discussion on this one? See none? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
We took care of 9D. We're on to 9E. Review recreated Chapter 2 Village Board of the Village of Oregon Village Code and related Village Board governance policies. Martin, do you want to say anything on that?
Sure, yep. So this has obviously been a project that we've been working on for about a year now. And we're getting to the point where some final drafts are being formulated. So Chapter 2 is to a point that I wanted to get into all of your hands to start looking at. I would say that by and large, Chapter 2 is pretty consistent with what it exists today in terms of overall substance. There's a few things that I highlighted in my memo that I think are noteworthy changes. One is the Code of Ethics, which is currently under Chapter 2. It applies to all village boards, committees, and commission members, so why it's under the village board chapter, I'm not sure, but I think it makes more sense to go under Chapter 1, which is just general government, so just moving that out of there. I did some working on kind of the order of business as far as the village board's agenda, just based on what I've observed over the last year. One of the big things I think that I'm asking the board to consider is to do a consent agenda, which if you're not familiar with, it basically takes routine procedural items and you just approve all of them with one motion. So for example, this agenda, all the items under 7, which are, miscellaneous business, that's a good place where you would just have a consent agenda and you just motion to approve, and then they're all approved. You would put there's procedures that are in place where if there's a particular item that you were interested in and you wanted a separate vote on them or separate discussion, a board member would have the ability to just say, nope, I want to pull that item out and have a separate vote on that. So that helps with the meeting efficiency and is commonly used. Then for standing committees, I know we've talked about this quite a bit, and I talked to some of the new board members that came on this last April. I know we finished our conversation with eliminating the finance committee, but in some of those conversations, I decided to recommend keeping it, but just retooling it, and then actually retooling all of our standing committees to be a little bit more focused on specific topics. The best example is finance, buildings, and facilities. So we have buildings and facilities within that committee, but then we also have a public works and utilities committee, and then we also have personnel and public safety together. So there's some different things that are lumped together that I would say we could streamline those and help some of the board members specialize in certain topics or things that they're interested in. So my suggestion is to change the finance committee to just a finance and personnel committee, make it more of an administrative committee where myself or Candy or Lisa, we can take things to that committee. The personnel, public safety, and protection committee would just be public safety. So anything related to that, as far as policing or even building inspection or alcohol licensing, those sorts of things. And then just keeping the public works and utilities committee, but then giving facilities and buildings to that committee. Another thing that I had in there, and we can, totally the board's option, is the removal of ordinance readings. I know for every ordinance that we've had, right now we require 2 readings and we always waive it. I asked Candy, she couldn't remember a single time in her experience that we've ever actually done the readings. And you always have the option, if it's something controversial or something people are interested in, you can always delay action. And then the other thing that's a pretty large piece of this is creating a board handbook. And so this is something I've seen some communities do, which is, it's essentially an employee handbook, but for the village board. So it helps new village board members and existing board members orient themselves to their new role or their existing role, but then also aggregates all of the village board adopted policies into one document. So you become a new board member, you get this document, it tells you what your role is, kind of some background information about the village, and then it gives you all the governance policies that the village board has placed upon itself. And we've put together and adopted some of those policies this last year. We did the agenda and packet policy, we did a public comment policy, we did the interim policy on virtual meetings. So all of those policies would get globbed together into a board handbook. And then the board can, of course, change that from time to time by resolution. It allows for policies that maybe are a little bit less informal or don't have the tone necessarily of an ordinance that's more definite and specific. And so that gives the board the opportunity to have those policies and to know that they're in one place. And I did add a couple policies for the board to consider. One was a legislation policy, which describes the different types of legislation that the board can use and when you want to use them. There are some legal parameters, some statutory things that we need to follow, so that's all housed in that policy. And then I also did a public comment or public hearing policy about how we operate public hearings. And a lot of that stuff I drew from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and some of the things that they provide as recommendations and references that they use. So I know that's a lot of information, and we can talk about it as little or as much as you want. I wanted to make sure I got it into all of your hands so you guys can read it. At the end of my memo, I kind of map out a schedule for knocking this project out. So certainly we'll talk about this over the next 4 or 5 potential meetings. I'm also finishing up chapter 1 and hope to get that to you guys in July.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Martin? Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, just kind of a couple comments on the section 2 of the code. 2.01, you reference that the board is a judge of the election and qualification of its members. I'm not sure what that means, but I read that to be we have a say in who we seat. Is that?
That is how it reads in statute. So that's 6132. That's how that reads exactly. And so what that means, that's for your village attorney to give you advice on.
Huh. That's sort of scary. Section 2.02, we're moving to quarterly payments for, not that I'm counting on my village salary.
So that's interesting. So, and that might be something we need to address as well. We may need to make a change to that particular, because what do we do it monthly now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that may need to be changed. And I think actually because we're not changing the total dollar amount, I think we can make that as a simple ordinance change when we do this. Because that's how it's actually written right now in our ordinance, so we just need to make that change.
Okay. Section 2.04, you talk about having a clerk take charge of a meeting until we elect a chair, which conflicts with Section 2.08, which says the vice president presides.
Yep, yeah, and that was, that's a good catch.
You're taking all
Yes,
of
that
mine.
needs to be
I was
made
gonna
more
say all three
consistent
of
with the vice president language.
Okay. And then lastly, hopefully this is the other thing that Amanda had on her list to say. Section 2.11 is not in the current code on voting. Section 2.11(9)(a), you expand to include personal interest, and I think I know where you're going with this, but I think it's too vague. I mean, what's a personal interest? I've always had a personal interest in science and technology. Does that disqualify me from voting on that? Or, Randy's an artist. Does that disqualify him from voting on anything that deals with arts?
Isn't it statutory language?
Yeah, I think it
Is
is.
it?
I know that it's.
I know
and
finance
and we
is.
can check on that. I pulled that language exactly from the league's model ordinance.
I'm
so
pretty
I
sure it's
can-
in the statute.
In the Government 101 on Friday, they quoted that as well. We had a discussion about what that meant,
Yeah.
what that meant or doesn't mean.
Yeah.
And did you come to any conclusion?
Yeah, sure.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends.
It depends.
That's
It's
great.
complicated.
It depends.
Great.
Yeah, that was the long and short answer of it.
And then for 9B, if people do abstain, that section says we're recalculating what's considered a quorum at that point for voting, or a majority for voting.
So which one was that one?
9B?
2.11 9B.
Yeah, that's language I pulled right from the league's model, so that would be one. I can check with Matt on that and see where they're
Well,
potentially pulling
it
that
makes
from.
sense. I'm
Mhm.
just, wanted to confirm that.
Yep.
Did I miss anything, Amanda?
That's, no, you had some extras in there, the last ones I did not. Good.
Yeah, like I said, I pulled, so the league has kind of a model ordinance that touches quite a bit of this, and the vice president was not in their model, so, yeah, that was a good catch on making sure that's consistent with what we've done here in Oregon.
All right, Mike, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, Amanda? You have anything to add, or are you
Yeah,
good?
well, this is back to what your suggestions are. I like all of them. The only question I have is the consent agenda. I like the idea of it, but I feel like this board asks a lot of questions. And like, I feel like if we had one, we'd be like, can you remove B, C, D, G, F, Q, whatever it is. Like, we'd be pulling so much out of it that it almost isn't worth it, just because, not necessarily that all those items need discussion, but sometimes there's a question, and you want to hear the answer before you approve it.
And I think the board still has the opportunity when the consent agenda comes up and there's a motion and second, there's still an opportunity for discussion and questions of all of those items at that point. And
You
if,
don't have to go through them one at a time.
Yeah.
right, and, at that point, if maybe a question isn't satisfactory or there's concern, it's like, okay, well, I'd like to pull that item out and vote on it separately at this point.
Mhm. Okay, Amanda, are you good?
I guess so. Yeah, so like when that comes up and we're looking at the consent agenda, we're asking for approval, we can say, can I ask questions
Yes,
on this
yeah.
and this before we?
Yep, there's still
Yeah.
discussion on
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it'd be still the same as just any other business item as far as getting a motion in a second and then the president saying any other discussion. Board can talk about every single item, any and all items that are on the consent agenda at that
I
point.
gotcha. Okay.
All right, Jenna, you got,
I just wanted to say, thank you for putting this together. I love the idea of a consent agenda. I think that will, that'll offer some streamlined opportunities as well as giving us the opportunity to continue to pull things out that are of interest to us. And I really like the idea of the handbook as well. So thank you for putting in all that time and energy to get that done.
all right, yeah, Carleen?
So I just want to address 2.12 board committees. There is a discussion that has been brought up about term limits that the DEI committee is going to be talking about, and I'm assuming that that would go into this section.
Yeah, if there's something that comes out of the DEI committee and the board affirms it, we can add it in later as an amendment to the ordinance, or if we're still working on this, we can just put it right in before we approve it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Phil?
I have a lot, but most of it is, I was kind of on Matt being here, so, and, I understand completely. So maybe I'll just talk to him directly or talk to Martin,
That's fine. Yep.
rather than have everybody go through it.
Yeah, because this will come back to us. all
Yep.
this, Yep, okay,
Absolutely.
all right. All right, so we don't need any action, Martin, right?
Nope,
Okay.
I'll check on a couple of Mike's things and then we'll talk about it next meeting.
Okay, all right, let's go to 10, new business. Items are for discussion, possible action. 10A is consider village logo update and proposals from work of Ticey in Orange Whip. I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can take this one. This is kind of a fun side project that I been taking on. But so with our move out to 101 Alpine Parkway, we know we will need new letterhead and definitely a sign. Yep, business card, all of that. We'll need a sign so people know where we are, because right now it's a blank white sign. And then also with that, we thought this might be a good opportunity to give a little bit of an update to the village's logo. I think we want to stay with a similar theme with the historic downtown, but maybe kind of bringing it into the 21st century, maybe taking away the dust storm behind the...
That's smog.
Yeah. So we solicited proposals from 2 different local graphic designers. They're very similar in their scope, a little bit different in their price. I know that some board members might have some personal experience with either of these. I know Ticey worked on the sign design for OCB when the bank was there, so they have all of the, kind of specs, but those are very easy to come by. So I think either firm would do a great job for us, and just wanted to offer these proposals up. We know that signs right now have quite a long lead time, so that's the big item I want to make sure that we have in production this summer and fall, so that's ready before we open, so people know where we are, and everything else will kind of follow in suit. But just looking for recommendation and action from the board on either of these.
So we didn't actually see any logos, did we?
No, so this would be
Just to let them go ahead and.
hire one firm or the other, and then they
Oh.
would work with us. They'll probably come, have a discussion about what are our goals with the logo,
Okay.
what direction we want to go, and then we would come forward with, a concept or a couple concepts that you all
So
would
at
have a
least
chance to
the prices were quite a bit different,
Mhm.
weren't they?
Yeah, I think it's just based on, Tacey might come with a little bit more bells and whistles. We actually asked them to scale back their scope a little bit, because I think they were thinking that we wanted to start a logo from scratch, and we just mentioned that it's more of an update of what we currently have, so they did scale back their number, but I think Tacey just, the larger operation, and, obviously their proposal is a little bit more flashy, so I think you just, that's more in line with what their charges are. Orange Whip does a lot of work for a lot of local businesses too, and does a great job, so I think.
And I know Orange Whip did all the graphic stuff, all the printing and all that free for the library from day one.
And I would just mention that if you look at your screen, you might see why Tacey might be a little more expensive.
Right, bells and the whistles.
All right, so are you looking for us to decide on one?
Yes.
Okay. Do we want to get a motion on the table first?
Before we do that,
Yeah.
do we have to pick either?
No?
I was gonna-
No? you
Let's,
can-
I just want us to take a moment.
No, you can
Okay,
reject-
explain.
Okay, so I'm fine with a redesign. We clearly need some work, but everything I've learned, and I've looked, because I think, let's back up a little bit. I like the idea of communities having a brand. Okay, so I think this is important. And I did some looking around on like YouTube, looking for what makes a good logo, what makes a good, flag for a community or whatever you want to make. And simple is better. Like the simpler, the better. You can use symbolism and basic shapes. Basically, if like an 8 or 9-year-old can't replicate it by drawing it, it's too complicated. So I'm not sure that I want to make sure that if we're going to pick a company to do this, that we're giving them the right direction of what we really want in a logo. So I'd like to have a discussion about that.
All right, so Derek, Jenna, Phil.
I'll just throw out there that, to kind of go with, not necessarily with what Amanda said, but I don't necessarily find it hugely beneficial to the community. And given that we're talking about borrowing more money for the library, more money for this, more money for that, J.C. Park is phased, to spend, and I know this is a drop in the bucket, but to spend additional funding on something that may not necessarily need to be redone. I don't mind the current logo. I haven't heard a big community outpouring for a new one. So I would, and I guess I would also agree with Amanda that maybe casting a wider net as far as designers, if we are going to go this route, just to see a little bit more pricing, because there was a significant variance in the price between the two. If there's more graphic designers in the area, which I'm sure there are, maybe getting a few more bids might not be a bad way to go.
Okay, all right, yeah, Jenna, you're up.
So I like this. I have heard comments about our logo in the
Yeah.
past few years. I won't repeat them, but so I think it's great, and you're right. The timing seems really good since we're going to be ordering new signage and new letterhead. And but I guess I would like to also have a discussion on it, because I think this is a fun way to involve the community. Like maybe we could get a couple of different designs and have a voting, and like really get community participation in there. And so when I'm looking at these price differences, I'm like, is Ticey more expensive because they're going to help us navigate what that could be? Or, I guess I have more questions, and I want to see how we can pull the community in and how we can make this kind of a fun community event. And And whether that means also getting more proposals from people or what, I'm not sure, we can talk about that, but I do really like the idea, and I like that you took the initiative, but I just would like to talk more about how we're gonna do that and really turn it into something the community can participate in.
All right, yeah, Phil.
Just to address Man's point, certainly in my opinion, we don't have to accept anything that's offered, and we can always ask them to go back to the drawing board or look for others. As far as the price discrepancy, I half joked about the building, but I think that the staff at Ticey, they probably have exponentially more designers and exponentially more ideas, and that, I think that's what you're paying for. I have also got comments, and I personally think the logo needs work.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we need a refresh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carleen.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I echo Jenna's sentiments that this is a really great way to engage as many people in the community as possible and input on the design, and maybe some contests that are things where we have everybody from grade school kids to our seniors submitting some things for consideration that could be tweaked by designers to create a really great logo.
So a couple clarifying questions. I love all the ideas and love the idea of getting the community involved and kind of making an art type project. I guess, so there's the question of the sign that doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the logo. The logo could be on the sign. It could be something very simple to start. And I can get a sense from a couple sign, production folks of what that lead time actually looks like, because maybe maybe we just do a temporary sign as we go through this process, but that could be separate or in addition to the logo design. If we wanted one of these graphic designers or others to sort of shepherd us through the process of who do we want to be as a community and kind of more of a branding conversation, I think that's a larger scope than what we asked them to provide. So I would go back to these two, as well as perhaps casting the net wider for others to say, okay, here's what we're actually talking about now. I think the dollar amount could go up, or if we're going to do some kind of community art type project, how is that going to be organized? Ultimately, that has to be then turned into some sort of graphic type file that we can use on letterhead and such. So there's a lot of different ways it could go. It could be, again, just that maybe they help us narrow down to a couple concepts based on, maybe they come to a board meeting and we provide a little bit of direction to them, and then we offer the community the opportunity to vote. Could go a lot of different ways. I just want to make sure I understand what you all would like to see, so we come back with something that reflects that.
Yeah, we were very, I think we talked about this internally, and we were very careful to have these, the discussion we had was there's the village, which is the organization, and the village, which is the community. And we wanted this to be more like, this is the logo for the village as an organization. The rebranding and the, making a brand and all that kind of stuff is a much larger investment of time and community. Some communities spend hundreds of thousands of dollars going through that process. And so we wanted to be careful to kind of, we have this specific project that's generating this need for, do we want to put our existing logo on things, or do we want to bring it into the 21st century, so to speak, and modernize it a little bit for this? And then if we do want to do some sort of rebranding, that's a much larger conversation. But not to say that I think some of the ideas suggested about having some community involvement for this logo is still valid and important for sure.
Yeah, we have talked about looping or working with the chamber for a larger branding effort and updating our slogan. We really don't have one other than live, work, play, which is everybody else's. So there's that effort, as well as, are we still, horse capital? Do we want to be something else? That whole conversation is much larger, and, ties into tourism and all of that as well.
Mhm.
So I guess understanding the scope and this need, what would you like to see to have more information to make a recommendation?
Yeah, Phil?
It sounds like you're kind of narrowing the scope in the sense that you say this is just for some printed materials, and then not necessarily a logo that the village is going to adopt from now and all time. Is that accurate?
So the scope right now is basically an updated logo design, so taking the concept of what we have and maybe having a couple different ways that it's arranged or different colors, and we can have that to choose from. There would be the sign design for the main sign and probably some signs on the building itself to indicate entrances and things. And then the printed business, what they call collateral,
Right.
so your letterhead, your business cards, envelopes, things like that, so we
Right.
can get those ordered to have our new address.
So this would be, forgive me for using, this is an identity package that would use, when you're using it for letterhead, business cards, and signage, but, which is quite different than as they'd mentioned branding.
Mhm.
And I think that's more what you're thinking of too.
Right.
So I don't know if we want to put too much thought into this, because it's really going to be mainly printed materials and.
And a sign.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and a
that's
sign,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Again,
I think it would probably end up being Village of Oregon Hall with this logo up there. It wouldn't be like, the whole sign wouldn't be this logo. Just like if you get a stationery, it's not the whole sheet. It's just identifying, it's an identifying mark, but not, you know, it wouldn't be, the sign wouldn't be shaped like the logo.
Right, so like right now, there's an image I put on the memo, but, you know, OCB had their logo, then I think it said, you know, Oregon or something under there, so could be, yeah, the village logo or seal, and then underneath it would say Village Hall.
Here's-
Likely something
Yeah, let me
simple like
just-
that.
I have a folder that I've kept logos. Let's see.
Janet, while he's looking for that, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, because it's probably a good idea to update your logo every once in a while, that maybe we don't want to put our logos on the signage.
Right.
That would give us more time to address the, you know, the collateral, as you mentioned, but having our signage be a little bit more streamlined and simple, and then we have more time to do like the letterhead and things like that.
I mean, we've had, this was, I think, the official logo a while ago.
Put on your trucks.
That's a big dust cloud.
Which is
That's-
still around here.
Still a
It
dust
looks like
cloud.
that smells, that looks like it smells beer, or spells beer right there, which I don't think we want. And then this was generated somewhere along the way. This is traditionally kind of been what's been used for some shirts and some
Cards.
and then a lot of our letterhead and stuff, right? Is,
Yeah.
is
Put that
kind
We
of, yeah.
use this on our letterhead
Yeah.
and business cards.
So we kind of have a variety of different things that we've used.
No.
It's nice to
All right.
have some uniformity.
So where do we want to go?
Can I have one
Yeah,
more comment?
yeah.
I know you were talking about, and I'm not advocating for doing the branding, that's very expensive, but I just wanted to point out that some communities don't actually have a separation between their government logo and then their community branding. It's all one, so like City of Fitchburg is I just looked it up to see if my memory was correct, but it's the same
Oh, yeah.
continuity throughout, which I find helpful.
Yeah, Amanda?
I'm okay with going forward, having them updated, but I just would want to stress that simple is better.
Yeah.
If they can simplify it, make it easier and just,
Yeah, I would hope
it's
that
cleaner.
bringing in a professional graphic designer that does a lot of modern stuff, they know that that's sort of the
Right.
direction that design is headed, and if they're not, then
Right.
pivot them.
But I like the
Yeah.
idea of a bigger community branding too, like
Ye-
even having
yeah.
a community contest maybe where people put forth ideas and we, do that, because we could put it on a flag, we could brand it and use it. Like the city of Chicago did a great campaign where they made their own city flag and each of the 4 red stars on it symbolizes something different. But if you ask people, they can tell you what it all means because they had this big thing where they promoted it. I'm not saying we do all that, I'm just saying.
So-
Right,
But
and
like,
also, yeah.
but it's a clean, and you can find it everywhere. Like the Chicago flag is well known outside of Chicago because of this thing, and like, it would be a source of community pride if we could have our own sort of
Yeah.
brand.
So Amanda, and to Jenna's point too, I like the idea of especially if we're starting to go down this public art realm, this fits perfectly, you know, maybe not for this particular, but I could see that.
Yeah.
That fits perfectly.
And
the-
when we talk
yeah.
about things like, on our street lamps.
Right.
Putting things on those and
Yeah.
having,
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's a place where we could have a lot of diverse community input
Yeah.
into something that is our community brand.
And
I would
engagement,
hate
big
for us to
engagement,
just
yeah. Mike?
bypass that.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't, I mean, if we are gonna put this out to be redesigned, I wouldn't limit it to just a rework of our current logo. I think our current logos leads a lot to be desired. I agree with Amanda on simplifying things. I'd like to see what someone can creatively come up with, and of either of these, I go with Orange Whip just because it's cheaper and it's not, you know, it's not a branding experience.
So, Mike, I agree, just let them go. So here it is, see what you come up with.
Yeah.
They offered 4 or 6 different things.
Yeah,
One of them
yeah.
can be a rework of the current one, the other ones could be something
They're the
entirely
creative,
out
right?
there,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we'll have a bigger clout.
We already were
So-
there before. Yeah.
So, Elise, you're still looking for us to pick one, though, and,
Well, if you want to, otherwise we can get more proposals. If you want to, I guess, widen the net a little bit and say, it's not just taking what we have and kind of making it look better, but come up with a whole different concept. I guess I just want to clarify with these designers.
because that could change the price, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Phil?
For $1,500 or $2,500, in my opinion, is probably an interim amount. I know it's real money, but it's probably an interim amount. So I think we should just go ahead, have them do it, go with the lowest bidder. I wouldn't give them any direction.
Yeah,
See what
and see
comes
what they come
back.
up with. We don't have to accept it, right?
Worst possible scenario, we're out $1,500.
Well, we
So-
don't have to accept it, right? I mean,
No, we don't have to accept
Yeah.
what they propose. So I'd make a motion that we would go ahead with Orange Whip's proposal.
all right, we got a motion. Mike is seconding. Any other discussion? Let's see what what he comes up with.
I would just say simple.
Simple.
That's
I
the
would
only
say-
direction.
All right.
I'd say no
But
direction.
Simple.
Really simple.
All
Like an
right.
Oregon swoosh.
My direction is no direction.
Yeah.
That's correct. You got it.
I got it.
segment of
Got it,
the
Phil.
meeting.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
probably
See
watching.
what they say.
So
Yeah.
simple,
Yeah.
simple. All right. So we got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Okay. Who said, somebody say no? All right, Derek said no, okay. All right. 10B, I think it's our last item, almost. 10B, future agenda items. Item gives the board members opportunity to place items and new business on future agendas for discussion. Anybody have anything tonight they want to add? All
I
right.
can do a report next time.
Yeah, you'll do
Maybe I
it,
can-
yeah. Okay. All right. Looks like, what do we have? 8:30. We're looking for an adjournment. All right, Carleen and Amanda, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.